The control is real illusion. You think you are the author of your choices. You wake up in the morning and decide what to eat, what to wear, where to go. You weigh options, you deliberate, and you arrive at a conclusion that feels authentically yours. But what if that sense of authorship is the most pervasive illusion humanity has ever constructed? What if your preferences, your ambitions, even your gut reactions are the product of forces so vast, so hidden, that you never stood a chance of resisting them? This is the control is real illusion, a phenomenon in which the feeling of self-direction is so convincing that it blinds us to the machinery running behind the scenes. Consider the way advertising works. Modern marketing doesn't simply display products, it engineers your desires. Think about the first time you craved a specific brand of shoes or phone or car. Did you really come to that decision independently? Or was it seeded by thousands of images, sounds, and carefully orchestrated associations that were fed to you since childhood? A child who watches cartoons peppered with bright logos and jingles doesn't merely learn about toys. They are inducted into a system of want, designed to unfold predictably over decades. As they age, the techniques shift. Nostalgia triggers, social proof, aspirational lifestyles, micro-targeted online campaigns that show you exactly what you are most likely to click. By the time you believe you have chosen, the choosing has already been done for you. This same dynamic holds true for more than products. Social norms shape the boundaries of what you think is appropriate or possible. If you had been born into a different century, you might have thought it unremarkable to marry at 14, to die in battle for a feudal lord, or to accept that disease was divine punishment. Today, you are convinced your values are self-evident truths, but they are merely the current consensus, pressed into you by the schools you attended, the television you absorbed, the laws you internalized, and the expectations of everyone around you. It's tempting to imagine you can break free by making a countercultural choice. You might decide to reject popular brands, to boycott social media, to live off the grid. But even these gestures of rebellion are defined by the very systems you are reacting against. In psychological experiments, researchers have repeatedly shown that when people believe they are acting independently, they are often responding to invisible priming. In one study, volunteers were subtly exposed to words associated with aging. Words like retired, wrinkle, Florida. Moments later, these same people walked down the hallway more slowly, unaware that their motor behavior had been manipulated. In another experiment, participants were given what appeared to be free choices between items. Yet, hidden in the design was a nudge that predictably steered the majority toward one option. When questioned, most insisted their decision was spontaneous and uncoerced. This is how control operates in the modern world, not through overt commands, but through invisible channels of influence. Governments learned this lesson early in the 20th century. Propaganda in wartime didn't just inform citizens. It constructed narratives so emotionally potent that people came to see loyalty and sacrifice as personal convictions. During the Second World War, both Allied and Axis powers deployed films, posters, radio broadcasts, and carefully selected news stories to make the unthinkable seem necessary. When you ask someone why they supported rationing or internment camps or volunteer enlistment, they will often say it was simply the right thing to do. They don't recognize how their own moral frameworks were engineered. Today, the infrastructure of control is even more sophisticated. Social media platforms monitor every click, every pause, every reaction. Their algorithms refine your feed to keep you scrolling. The longer you stay, the more data they collect about your weaknesses and curiosities. This data feeds predictive models that anticipate what you will engage with next. When you click on an article or watch a video, you may believe you stumbled upon it by chance, but in reality, you were guided there by a cascade of probabilities calculated to exploit your attention. This doesn't mean you are a puppet without any agency, but your agency is bounded. It exists within a garden of forking paths, all designed and curated by forces you can barely perceive. You are free to wander, but the walls of the maze are hidden behind your own convictions that you are in control. Consider the story of Edward Bernays, the so-called father of public relations. In the 1920s, Bernays was hired to help tobacco companies expand their market. At the time, it was taboo for women to smoke in public. Rather than challenge the taboo head-on, Bernays reframed it. He orchestrated a publicity stunt during the 1929 Easter Parade in New York City. A group of women lit cigarettes and marched under the banner of equality and freedom, calling them Torches of Liberty. The event was covered by newspapers across the country. Almost overnight, the cultural meaning of smoking shifted. What was once seen as shameful became a symbol of emancipation, and women, believing they had made a personal decision to assert their independence, became lifelong customers. Ask yourself, when you feel a powerful urge to take a stand, how sure are you that the impulse is truly yours? How much of your identity was assembled by industries, institutions, and historical forces that require your participation to survive? This illusion of control extends to political beliefs. Studies have found that people often adopt positions not by weighing evidence, but by absorbing the emotional tone of their community. If your friends and family believe something, you are far more likely to echo it. Not because you've rationally concluded it's true, but because belonging feels safer than questioning. Even when confronted with contradicting information, most people double down rather than reevaluate. This is not a flaw in your thinking. It is the predictable output of a social brain wired to prioritize cohesion over truth. If you doubt this, look at the history of mass movements. Revolutions are rarely born from pure logic. They are lit by stories that resonate with fear, pride, or grievance. Whether it's the Reign of Terror in France, the Cultural Revolution in China, or more recent upheavals around the globe, the script is familiar: a narrative of betrayal, a promise of renewal, an invitation to join something larger than yourself. Each participant believes they have chosen freely, while the emotional gravity of the movement pulls them into predictable behaviors. But there is a deeper layer still. Neuroscience has shown that the brain's readiness potential, an electrical signal that precedes conscious intention, fires before you are aware of deciding. In lab experiments, researchers can predict which hand you will move several hundred milliseconds before you believe you have made the choice. What does that mean? At the very smallest scale, your sense of will may be a retroactive story your mind tells to make sense of processes already underway. So the next time you feel certain that you are in charge, pause and look closer. The control is real. Illusion is not a conspiracy. It is the inevitable consequence of a brain that must survive in a world dense with signals and incentives. You can learn to notice some of these forces, to question your impulses, to slow the reflex of certainty, but you will never completely escape the currents that shaped you. That realization can be unsettling. It feels like surrendering a cherished part of yourself. But in truth, seeing the illusion is the first step toward a more honest relationship with your own mind. If you can accept that you are a product of countless influences, you may discover a new kind of freedom. Not the freedom to be untouched by history or culture, but the freedom to witness them in real time, to gently resist when you choose, and to recognize that even resistance can be another strand in the web. You were never as alone in your thoughts as you believed, and perhaps that too is what it means to be human. The productivity equals worth trap. You wake up with the vague sense that you're already behind. Before your eyes have even adjusted to the morning light, there is a voice inside your head whispering that you need to catch up to some invisible benchmark. It doesn't matter that you were exhausted yesterday. It doesn't matter that your body aches. It doesn't matter that your mind is frayed from carrying too many obligations. In this world, where productivity equals worth, all that matters is whether you are producing something that can be measured, evaluated, and compared. This is the trap that so many of us fall into without ever realizing it. We internalize the belief that rest is weakness, that stillness is laziness, that if we pause even for a moment, we will fall behind, and everything we have worked for will dissolve. And so, we keep moving, frantically, compulsively, often without questioning why. Imagine a craftsman in an old workshop working through the night to carve elaborate designs into furniture no one has ordered. The work is precise, even beautiful, but it is driven by fear. Fear that if he stops, if he ever dares to rest his hands, he will cease to matter. He believes that every moment not spent carving is a moment wasted, a moment that will prove he is inadequate. So he works until his hands tremble and the wood blurs before his eyes. He believes that his exhaustion is evidence that he cares enough. You might recognize this in yourself. Maybe you have convinced yourself that staying busy is the same as being valuable. Maybe you have accepted that burnout is inevitable, even necessary, if you want to deserve respect. When you finally collapse, when you can't function anymore, a part of you feels relief. because now, at least, you have proof that you've tried hard enough. You wear your depletion like a badge of honor. This is not an accident. Our culture rewards output over presence. We measure each other by external achievements, how many hours you worked, how many goals you checked off, how many projects you completed. We rarely ask how you feel or whether you are fulfilled. We just want to see evidence that you are striving. We have created an unspoken rule that if you rest, you are not contributing. If you are not contributing, you are disposable. Think about how children learn this message. A child who is praised only when they bring home perfect grades or trophies absorbs the lesson that love is conditional. They begin to believe that they are only lovable when they are performing. Later, that same child becomes an adult who cannot sit still without guilt. They can't take a weekend off without feeling they have to earn it. Even vacations turn into opportunities for optimization. How many sights did you see? How many experiences did you collect? How many memories did you document? Even leisure becomes a performance. This mindset is so pervasive that it feels like the truth. But it's not. It's just a story we have agreed to tell ourselves and each other. In this story, you are an engine, a machine built to generate outcomes. You are measured by your output, not your humanity. So of course you feel like a failure when you stop moving. Of course you feel like an imposter when you slow down. It doesn't help that modern technology constantly amplifies this narrative. Every notification reminds you that someone else is doing more, faster, better. Your feed is a highlight reel of relentless productivity. People launching businesses, publishing books, transforming their bodies, building empires. You see their milestones, but you never see their exhaustion. You don't see the nights they spent crying or the mornings they couldn't get out of bed. You only see the polished surface, and you assume that's the whole story. The truth is, no one can sustain endless output without consequences. Your nervous system isn't built to be in perpetual drive mode. When you force yourself to stay in motion without pause, you activate stress responses that eventually break you down. Chronic cortisol elevation impairs your memory, your sleep, your immune system. Your body starts to whisper warnings: fatigue, headaches, anxiety. If you ignore those whispers, they escalate into screams. And here is the most insidious part. The more burned out you become, the more convinced you feel that you're finally doing enough. The exhaustion becomes a twisted justification. You tell yourself that if you feel this drained, it must mean you've earned your place. You've proven that you care, that you are serious, that you deserve to belong. But none of that is true. Your worth is not a function of your productivity. Your value is not measured by your exhaustion. You were never meant to be a machine. Imagine if you measured a tree by how many apples it could produce every season, and you cut it down when it went dormant. You would destroy something that was designed to have cycles, periods of growth, periods of stillness, periods of renewal. You are no different. You need time to rest. You need time to simply be. When you pause, you are not failing. You are allowing the deeper parts of you to breathe. You are reconnecting to what you love, not just what you can accomplish. You are remembering that you have inherent dignity that no amount of hustle can create or erase. This is not easy to accept in a culture that profits from your self-doubt. But if you want to reclaim your life from the productivity trap, you must learn to tolerate the discomfort of being still. You must practice reminding yourself that you have nothing to prove. You are already enough. The next time you feel the impulse to measure your day by how much you got done, pause. Ask yourself, who am I when I am not producing? Who am I when I am not proving anything? The answers may terrify you because they force you to face your deepest fear, that without constant achievement, you are ordinary. But that is the greatest freedom of all, to discover that being ordinary is not a failing. It is a return to your humanity. You do not have to be exhausted to be worthy. You do not have to burn out to earn rest. You are allowed to exist without justifying your presence through endless striving. You are allowed to be here simply because you are here. And when you can finally sit in that truth, without flinching, you will have escaped the trap that has stolen so much of your peace. The moment you realize your worth is intrinsic, not transactional, everything changes. You are free. The mirror shows truth lie. When you stand before a mirror, you believe you are confronting the truth. You see the outline of your body, the color of your eyes, the slope of your shoulders. You catch the tired lines under your gaze and the curve of your mouth, trying to mimic confidence or hide fatigue. But this moment, this tiny fraction of reality, is not an authentic revelation. It is a performance of surfaces. A mirror doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care what you feel, what you regret, or what you pretend to be. It simply reflects the light that bounces off your skin. It projects a flattened image of a three-dimensional life. You might call it honesty, but the mirror is the most elegant liar you will ever meet. Think about this. If you were to spend an entire day walking with a mirror strapped to your chest, all you'd see would be your face reacting to your environment. But you would never glimpse the thoughts rushing behind your eyes, the chemical storms brewing in your neurons, or the memories that ripple just beneath your awareness. Your reflection could never show you the private conversations you replay over and over in your mind, or the guilt that seeps through when you think nobody notices. Even when you stare at yourself long enough to feel that unsettling disconnection, the one where your face starts to look foreign, what you're experiencing is not clarity. It's the shock of realizing how little your reflection truly belongs to you. We are trained to equate reflection with revelation. We grow up with fairy tales about mirrors that expose hidden truths, that can't be tricked or bribed. Snow White's stepmother demands the mirror to confirm her beauty or her decay, as if glass and silver contain moral judgment. But in reality, a mirror only returns what you expect to see. You frown, and it frowns back. You smile, and it performs the same obedient smile. It never questions why you smile or why you frown. It doesn't ask whether your expression is an armor you put on to survive the day or a mask you learn to wear so people wouldn't look too closely. Imagine a person who lives their entire life craving external validation. Someone who can't feel worthy unless their reflection appears flawless. They chase the next cream, the next procedure, the next filter, believing that if they perfect the image, they will perfect the self. But all the mirror does is hold up a moving target. It traps you in the illusion that if you just adjust the angle, the lighting, the contour, you'll finally see something that feels like enough. Yet, every time you walk away, that sense of satisfaction evaporates, because the mirror can never show you the substance underneath. It can only seduce you with the illusion that substance was ever visible on the surface. Let's go deeper. Consider how different cultures have regarded mirrors as portals, as gateways between the seen and the unseen. In ancient folklore, mirrors could capture spirits. They could trap a soul if someone died in their reflection. That superstition is unsettling because it contains a fragment of psychological truth. A mirror does steal something intangible: your attention, your certainty, your sense of internal coherence. When you stare too long, your awareness collapses into the feedback loop of appearances. You stop asking, "What do I feel?" and start asking, "What do I look like feeling it?" You forget to notice the quiet truths of your heart because you are preoccupied with managing the spectacle of your face. Even in more modern examples, mirrors have been used to control perception. Think about interrogation rooms with one-way mirrors, tools that give one side power over the narrative, while the other side can only see themselves. The mirror becomes a veil of selective disclosure. You may think you are observing yourself in isolation, but you are actually being observed in a larger context you can't see. It's no coincidence that the same principle applies to social media. Every selfie is a digital mirror, a performance of a life carefully curated to elicit approval. You scroll through other people's reflections and compare them to your own, forgetting that everyone is locked in the same hall of distortions. Have you ever noticed how you look different in every mirror? The one in your bathroom seems kinder in the morning light. The one at work seems harsher under fluorescent bulbs. The tiny mirror in your pocket makes your features look slightly alien, almost compressed. This inconsistency should tell you something important. Mirrors are never an objective record of your reality. They are tools of projection. They conspire with light, context, and your own expectations to deliver a result that feels authoritative. But in truth, the mirror is only a collaborator in your self-deception. And what about the struggle behind the reflection? The nights you lay awake questioning every decision you ever made, the mornings when you drag yourself from bed feeling hollow and directionless, none of that leaves an imprint on your reflection. You can be on the verge of collapse, but if you can steady your features, the mirror will swear you're fine. This is why so many people feel like imposters in their own skin. Their reflection betrays no evidence of their internal war. It's just a face, an arrangement of familiar shadows. This is the real cruelty of the mirror. It persuades you that identity is a static image, that you can sum yourself up in a single glance, that you can define your worth by a passing configuration of light. But you are not a static image. You are not a pose or an angle or a measurement. You are a living continuum of failures and triumphs, longing and fear, resilience and regret. You are every secret you've never spoken aloud, every doubt that stalks your mind, every hope you don't dare to confess. Next time you look into a mirror, pause before you accept its verdict. Ask yourself whether the reflection is telling you anything you don't already know. Ask whether it shows the battles you've survived, the people you've loved, the compromises you've made to stay afloat. Chances are, it doesn't. Because a mirror is only a shallow witness. It cannot perceive the reality of your becoming. It cannot hold the complexity of your experience. It cannot testify to your hidden struggles or your unspoken strength. So, remember this, the mirror shows nothing but the lie of surfaces. It offers a convenient shortcut to self-knowledge, but the truth of who you are will never be contained in the silent flicker of your own image. The real truth lives in the unphotographed moments, the ones nobody sees. The real truth lives in the memories that can't be reflected. The real truth is in you, not in the glass, and you don't need a mirror's approval to believe it. The stability myth framework. You were told that stability is the highest virtue, the final prize after all your striving. You were taught to believe that if you could only secure a predictable life, a steady job, a fixed routine, a relationship that never shifts under your feet, you would finally be safe, finally be worthy. But what if that promise is a myth, crafted not out of wisdom, but out of a subtle fear that festers under the skin of every so-called settled life? What if stability is not the sanctuary you were promised, but a gilded cage where your spirit slowly starves while your polite smile stays frozen in place? Imagine waking up each day in the same room, with the same thoughts, the same worries, and the same victories that no longer thrill you. On the surface, this predictability feels reassuring, but in the quiet hours, when no one is watching, you sense an invisible tremor, an anxiety that your carefully arranged life is actually a house of cards, that all your control is an illusion you must defend at any cost. This is the polite panic that stability breeds, the constant tension of keeping everything from changing, even though change is the only thing that proves you are alive. Think of the person who spends decades in a job they quietly despise because it offers a reliable paycheck. They rationalize every dull meeting and every hollow performance review with the mantra that stability is noble. But if you look closer, you will see a soul that has learned to shrink itself to fit the shape of a role that no longer fits. The moment they imagine walking away, just stepping into the unknown, they feel their heart beat faster, not because the unknown is dangerous, but because it is honest, because it reveals how much of their life has been a performance staged for the comfort of others. Consider the relationship that feels safe simply because it is familiar. Two people who once thrilled each other now pass time in a silent truce, afraid to speak the truth that their connection has dissolved into habit. They tell themselves that staying together is the stable choice, that leaving would be chaos, that they are protecting their children, their finances, their reputations. But sometimes, the most unstable choice is the one they have already made, pretending that love is still alive when it is only inertia that keeps them tethered. This is the paradox of stability. The more you cling to it, the more brittle it becomes. The more you demand that nothing changes, the more you guarantee that any disruption will feel catastrophic. You build your life on a foundation of static expectations, and when those expectations are finally betrayed, as all expectations are, the entire structure trembles. A layoff, a diagnosis, a betrayal, or even the quiet erosion of your own interest in your carefully arranged routine can topple everything. Because you have never practiced the art of adaptation. Because you confused safety with stagnation. The myth of stability thrives because it sounds so reasonable. It wears the voice of authority. Your parents, your teachers, your mentors. It tells you that only fools invite uncertainty, that only reckless people walk away from comfort, that you must keep your head down, protect your assets, keep your secrets, and never question the quiet desperation that builds behind your polite smiles. But the truth is that life itself is a series of thresholds, doors that you can only walk through if you are willing to abandon the security of your current room. The unknown is not an enemy. It is a proving ground where you shed what no longer serves you and discover who you could become. Consider how nature handles change. A tree sheds its leaves in winter, not because it is dying, but because it is preparing for renewal. An animal leaves familiar territory when food runs scarce. The entire natural world adapts in real time, surrendering stability in favor of growth and survival. But humans, with our sophisticated rationalizations, cling to what no longer nourishes us, insisting that stability will protect us from the pain of evolution. We forget that evolution is the point. You might feel that the unknown will destroy you, that stepping away from the predictable will unmoor you from everything that makes you valuable or safe. But look at the moments when you felt most alive. Were they scripted? Were they carefully managed? Or were they the times when you said yes to something that terrified you? An unfamiliar opportunity, an unexpected relationship, a creative risk. Did you feel small in those moments? Or did you feel as if you were finally meeting the edges of your own potential? The unknown is not the abyss you think it is. Often, it is the only place where you can encounter your authentic self. Let's look at some examples. A man who spent 20 years as an accountant realizes he has memorized every possible outcome of his workday. Nothing surprises him anymore. He tells himself he is stable, responsible, safe. But when he closes his office door and sits in the dark, he can feel a subtle grief. He has never allowed himself to try the painting he loved as a child. He has never traveled, never risked failure in pursuit of something that mattered more than security. He doesn't admit it aloud, but he wonders if the price of stability was simply too high, or the woman who stays in a marriage long after her heart has gone quiet. She tells herself she is protecting her children from upheaval, but children feel the truth more than they hear the words. They sense the hollow spaces, the brittle routines. They learn to fear honesty because their parents never modeled it. They grow up believing that stability is more important than integrity. And one day, they replicate the same silent arrangements in their own lives. The myth continues because no one is brave enough to break it. If you are listening to this, ask yourself, what are you holding on to simply because it feels stable? Is it a career you outgrew? A relationship you no longer love? A version of yourself that is too small for the life you dream of? What would happen if you stopped defending your stability and allowed yourself to be curious about what lies beyond it? What would happen if you trusted that you can survive, even thrive, on the other side of what you think you need to control? You were taught that stability is the reward for maturity, that growing up means settling down, lowering your expectations, and learning to endure whatever keeps you safe. But there is another kind of maturity, the kind that knows stability is only valuable when it supports growth, not when it traps you. The kind that understands no job, no relationship, no identity is worth sacrificing the aliveness that comes from honest risk. The kind that learns to trust the unknown, even when it terrifies you, because everything you have ever become started as something you did not yet understand. You do not need to destroy everything you have built. You do not need to throw away the parts of your life that truly nourish you. But you do need to examine your relationship with control. Ask yourself whether your stability is chosen or inherited, whether it is a foundation for growth or a camouflage for fear, whether it allows you to expand or insists you stay exactly where you are, no matter how much you have outgrown it. When you feel the polite panic rise, when your routines feel too tight, your roles too scripted, your days too predictable, take it as a signal. You are ready for more. You are ready to trust that the unknown will not consume you. It will reveal you, and it will teach you that the real safety you have been searching for was never in the control itself. It was in the courage to surrender it, because in the end, stability is not the point, aliveness is. And sometimes, the only way to feel alive is to stop rehearsing safety and step, with your whole uncertain heart, into whatever comes next. The repeat equal sign, real bias. Imagine you hear the same statement over and over. Maybe it's on the news, in your social feed, whispered by a friend, printed on a billboard, or embedded in a catchy slogan you see each morning as you sip your coffee. The repetition feels familiar. It starts to feel safe. And after enough exposure, you might find yourself nodding in agreement, not because you have evidence, not because you investigated the claim, but because your mind has confused frequency with validity. This is the repeat equals real bias. It's an ancient flaw in human cognition, a shortcut that helped our ancestors survive, but today can make us dangerously susceptible to manipulation. When something is repeated, our brains process it more fluently. Psychologists call this cognitive ease. The words slip into our awareness without friction. We feel we understand them, so we start to believe them. But this feeling is deceptive. Fluency isn't truth, simplicity isn't proof. Yet, if you hear a lie enough times, your nervous system begins to treat it like a trusted companion. Take, for example, a rumor that spreads in a small town. Maybe someone says that a certain neighbor is dishonest. There is no evidence, no witness, no documentation. But the rumor repeats each time in a slightly different tone, from a slightly different mouth. Soon, that neighbor becomes an outcast. Not because of facts, but because repetition forged an illusion of consensus. This is how reputations are destroyed. This is how entire communities can turn against an innocent person. In the age of digital media, the repeat equals real bias is magnified. An algorithm shows you the same piece of content dozens of times. You assume it must be credible because you keep encountering it. You think, surely, so many appearances mean it's important. But what you're really seeing is a feedback loop. Your clicks and pauses train the machine to serve you more of the same. Repetition is mistaken for relevance, and relevance is mistaken for reality. Think about how this bias shapes your sense of self. If you were told over and over that you are inadequate, that you are unworthy, those words might start to sound like truth. Not because you evaluated them rationally, but because the repetition wore grooves in your mind. You can become imprisoned in a narrative that never deserved to exist. And it's not just about lies. Even neutral or positive statements repeated without scrutiny can seduce us into certainty. A brand tells you it's the best. A politician insists they alone can save you. A self-help guru proclaims that their method works every time. And because you've heard it repeatedly, you feel convinced without realizing you've skipped the step where you ask for evidence. This is why propaganda relies on repetition. Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi minister of propaganda, famously understood this principle. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. It's unsettling to think that our sense of what's real can be hijacked so easily, but it happens all the time. Consider the placebo effect. When patients are told repeatedly that a sugar pill will ease their pain, their brains produce real biochemical changes. Their bodies feel relief. Not because of the substance itself, but because the repeated suggestion built a powerful expectation. Repetition doesn't just shape perception, it reshapes biology. The same mechanism underlies advertising. If you watch the same commercial again and again, you begin to trust the product, even if you can't recall a single specific claim it made. You don't remember the details, you remember the feeling of familiarity. And familiarity feels safe. But feeling safe isn't the same as being right. In personal relationships, the repeat equals real bias can turn misunderstandings into permanent rifts. If someone repeats that you're inconsiderate or selfish, you might start to internalize that identity. You might stop defending yourself, stop asking questions, and simply surrender to the verdict. It doesn't matter if the accusation began as a projection of someone else's insecurity. Repetition alone gives it a veneer of truth. So, how do you defend yourself from this bias? You start by noticing when repetition is happening. Ask yourself, do I believe this because I've examined the evidence or because I've heard it so many times it feels like a fact? Pause before you accept any claim as reality. Even if everyone around you repeats it, remember that consensus isn't the same as truth. Train yourself to look for corroboration. When you feel certainty rising from the comfort of repetition, remind yourself that comfort and truth rarely share the same address. Real truth often arrives as a disruption, a challenge, an uncomfortable question. It rarely comes gift-wrapped in the same sentence said, 10,000 times. If you want an example of how powerful this bias is, look at any historical regime that controlled information. Whether it was ancient empires or modern dictatorships, the strategy was always the same. Repeat the narrative until no other reality could compete. Starve the population of competing perspectives, and the repeated story becomes the only story. That's why it's so crucial to preserve intellectual diversity, to question what you hear, even if questioning feels dangerous. Your mind is designed to conserve energy by trusting what it has seen before, but the truth often hides in the unknown, in the friction of new information. Repetition can create the illusion of safety, but it also builds invisible walls around your awareness. If you never step beyond those walls, you might never discover what is real. Lies don't become truth through repetition. They only become harder to recognize. And sometimes, the most honest thing you can do is to challenge what feels comfortable, to sit with the possibility that the belief you've heard 1,000 times might be nothing more than a comforting echo. This is the price of thinking critically. It means trading the ease of repetition for the tension of investigation. It means risking the loss of certainty in exchange for the chance to glimpse something real. And in a world where the loudest voices are often the most repetitive, it may be the only path left to reclaim your mind. The emotion =, weakness code. You were taught that feelings are a liability, that emotion is something to be conquered, buried, or dismissed. You were trained to believe that tears are evidence of failure, that sadness is a stain, that vulnerability is a flaw. But the truth is, emotion is information. It is the most ancient form of intelligence your body possesses. When you ignore it, you do not become stronger. You become a volcano pretending to be a mountain. You hold still on the surface while the pressure builds beneath, silently eroding your foundations until one day it erupts without warning. Consider the soldiers of the First World War, who were told that fear was cowardice. They were given no language to process the horror of trenches filled with gas and the endless shelling that turned their friends into unrecognizable forms. When they broke down, it was called shell shock, as though their minds had failed them instead of reacting as any human mind must under relentless trauma. The medical establishment tried to force them back to the front by shaming them or applying electric currents to their skin, insisting that toughness meant never feeling. Think about the way children are scolded for crying, boys especially. From the moment they show pain, they are instructed to suppress it, to toughen up, to be a little man. What does that child learn? That connection, empathy, and authenticity are weaknesses, that to survive, he must armor himself against his own nature, that the only safe emotions are anger or numbness, but no one tells him that unprocessed sorrow curdles into rage, or that hiding sadness only teaches it to leak out sideways. Emotion is data. It tells you where you hurt, what matters, what you need. It is a compass pointing to truth, but many prefer to snap the needle because they fear where it will lead. Anger reveals boundaries crossed. Grief reveals love that was lost. Shame shows where you feel unworthy. But if you pretend these signals don't exist, you blind yourself. You keep marching into the same mistakes, the same conflicts, wondering why life feels hollow. In the workplace, you might see the emotion = weakness code in the cult of overwork. You're expected to sacrifice rest, relationships, and well-being in the name of productivity. If you show stress or sadness, you are judged as fragile, so you adapt by wearing a mask that says everything is fine, you answer emails at midnight, you pretend you're not burning out. But the data doesn't disappear, it collects in your body, becomes insomnia, hypertension, migraines, addictions. Your nervous system records every ignored signal and waits for the chance to speak louder. Entire cultures have enshrined this code: the British stiff upper lip, the American bootstraps myth, the corporate slogans that worship resilience without compassion. We tell stories about heroes who never flinch, who never cry, who never break. But in reality, no one sustains that illusion without cost. The most courageous people in history were not those who never felt fear or sorrow. They were those who allowed themselves to feel everything, then acted anyway. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison. Do you think he never felt despair? He wrote of nights when he doubted he would see freedom again. He wept for the years he lost, for his children who grew up without him, but he did not bury those feelings. He honored them as evidence of what he valued. And that is why he could emerge with his humanity intact. When you pretend emotion is weakness, you become split. One part of you performs competence. The other part, hidden, carries your grief and fear. And because you never integrate them, you remain at war with yourself. You may project that war onto others, judging them for the same softness you hate in your own heart. You may become quick to anger because it feels safer than admitting pain. But what if you could see emotion as a teacher instead of an enemy? When you feel envy, it might be telling you what you yearn for. When you feel guilt, it might be reminding you to repair a connection. When you feel sadness, it is proof that you loved deeply enough to care. None of these are liabilities. They are signposts to the parts of your life that matter most. Imagine you are a house with many rooms. Emotion is the light that reveals what is inside. If you board up the windows, you don't erase what's there. You only stumble around in darkness, tripping over what you refuse to see. And over time, the darkness grows heavier, harder to clear. Every culture that taught you to fear feeling was also afraid of its own reflection. Because a society built on hierarchy and competition needs its members to be disconnected. If you are cut off from your emotions, you are easier to manipulate, easier to sell to, easier to control. You will buy what you don't need to numb what you don't name. You will obey when you should question. So the next time you feel something rising, don't swallow it. Pause and listen. Ask what it is trying to show you. You are not weaker for caring. You are not soft for hurting. You are simply human, and humanity is not a flaw to be eradicated. It is a birthright to be reclaimed. The voice equals power error. You have been taught to think that volume is proof of conviction, that if you want to matter, you must speak louder, push harder, drown out every competing voice until yours is the only sound left. You imagine that power looks like the raised fist, the roar that fills the room, the declaration that forces everyone to turn their heads. But real influence is rarely that obvious. The loudest person is not always the most certain. The person who shouts over others is often masking a hollow core. You think you are listening to strength, but you are often hearing fear trying to disguise itself as authority. Consider how a whisper can move through a crowd with more impact than a scream. A single sentence spoken in a calm, measured tone can plant a seed that grows long after the noise has faded. Power is not about volume. It is about resonance. When you understand this, you stop chasing the compulsion to shout your ideas into every space. You begin to see that real power does not announce itself with spectacle. It emerges in quiet moments, in the spaces between words, in the calm certainty that does not demand validation. Think about the people you remember most clearly. Not always the ones who dominated the room. Often it was the person who looked you in the eye and spoke softly but directly, who said something that slipped past your defenses and settled in your mind like an echo that would not fade. You believed them not because they overwhelmed you, but because they were anchored in something deeper than performance. There is a kind of desperation that fuels loudness. The need to be acknowledged can become an obsession. You start to believe that if you are not visible, if you are not always performing your certainty, you will disappear. So you project an exaggerated confidence, hoping no one will notice the cracks. You raise your voice, repeat yourself, dominate conversations, confuse volume with substance. But the people who truly know their own power do not need to prove it constantly. They are not afraid of the silence between their sentences. They are not afraid of being misunderstood in the moment because they know time will vindicate the truth. Watch how a leader can quiet a room without raising their voice. Watch how a skilled negotiator can shift the outcome of an entire discussion with a single, calmly delivered phrase. Watch how a teacher can inspire a lifetime of change with a gentle question rather than a loud demand. These moments reveal something essential. Influence is not about decibels. It is about clarity, about alignment, about conviction that is so integrated it does not require spectacle to be felt. The error you make when you worship loudness is that you neglect the deeper layers of communication. You forget that humans are tuned to subtle signals, tone, posture, pauses, the steady presence that does not flinch under scrutiny. You forget that fear is loud because it feels it must compensate for its own fragility. Real conviction is patient. It does not need to overwhelm because it trusts that what is true will endure. This is why some of the most powerful revolutions begin in whispers, in secret meetings, in quiet refusals, in stories shared behind closed doors. A whisper can travel where a scream cannot. It can move through spaces that would reject overt demands. It can outlast the spectacle precisely because it does not depend on it. When you understand this, you realize that your need to be loud is often a need to be reassured. But you do not need reassurance when you are grounded in real purpose. Think about your own life. How many times have you performed certainty you did not feel? How often have you used volume as a shield to protect your own doubts? How often have you mistaken the noise in your head for clarity? What would happen if you allowed yourself to be silent long enough to hear the quieter truth underneath? The most dangerous myth is that the only way to be taken seriously is to be the loudest in the room. That myth keeps you performing. It keeps you reactive. It keeps you addicted to external validation. But there is another way. You can choose to speak less but mean more. You can choose to let your presence, not your volume, communicate your conviction. You can choose to trust that the people who need to hear you will find you without the theatrics. This choice will feel unnatural at first. You will worry that you are fading into irrelevance. You will worry that if you are not loud, you will not matter. But stay with that discomfort. Notice how much of your urgency comes from fear rather than purpose. Notice how quiet strength feels different in your body. It is calmer. It is deeper. It does not rise and fall with the reactions of others. When you embrace this, you discover that the most potent voice is often the one that does not need to declare its power. It simply is. It stands unshaken while the noise around it flares and dies. It leaves an imprint that no amount of shouting can replicate. If you want to have an impact that lasts, stop measuring your worth by how loud you can be. Start measuring it by how true you can be, how aligned, how unafraid to let your message stand on its own without the armor of volume. When you do this, you will see that power was never about how many decibels you could generate. It was about how clearly you could embody what mattered most. You don't have to raise your voice to matter. You don't have to perform certainty to be heard. You just have to be willing to stand in your quiet knowing and trust that its resonance will find the people it is meant to reach. The rest is just noise. The map is territory fallacy. You've probably heard the phrase, the map is not the territory. It sounds simple, almost like common sense. Of course, a map isn't the territory. Of course, a symbol isn't the thing it represents. But in practice, this is one of the most persistent and dangerous illusions shaping how we move through the world. We are creatures addicted to maps. We crave diagrams, categories, and systems to make the chaos digestible. We invent neat labels for sprawling, unpredictable realities. We draw lines around the uncontainable so that we can pretend it obeys our expectations. And somewhere in that process, we start believing the map itself is real. Think about how you learn anything complex, like love or grief or purpose. We create simplified models to explain these forces to ourselves. We say love is chemistry, or love is attachment, or love is a set of behaviors. And those models help us understand some part of the experience. They give us language, a framework to start with. But no model ever captures the entire truth. Love is bigger and stranger than any definition. It's the electric dread before you say, I love you. It's the weeks of doubt that follow. It's the quiet reassurance of someone's hand in yours when you have nothing left to offer but your exhaustion. A diagram can't hold that. A system can't quantify it. And yet we keep trying to flatten the depth into something that fits neatly on a page. Consider how this fallacy shows up in everyday life. You look at a resume and believe you know who someone is. You read a diagnosis and think you've learned everything about their mind. You scan a headline and feel convinced you've grasped the truth of a global crisis. But what you have is a model, an abstraction, never the full, irreducible reality. You are staring at a compressed version of a world too big to fit in any mental container. When you mistake that model for the territory itself, you stop questioning the limits of your understanding. You start treating assumptions as facts, and those assumptions quietly govern every judgment you make. Imagine someone who has only ever seen a map of a forest. They study the contours, the elevation lines, the labels marking rivers and clearings. They memorize every detail and start to believe they know the place intimately. But when they finally step under the canopy of trees, they discover the map never mentioned the smell of moss after rain. It never captured the texture of damp bark under their fingertips. It never warned them about the sudden hush when a deer steps into view. The living experience is infinitely richer than the representation, and sometimes completely contradictory to it. This is why no amount of expertise ever guarantees wisdom. You can be a master of conceptual frameworks and still be blind to reality when it doesn't match the neat shapes you expect. The philosopher Alfred Korzybski, who coined the phrase, "the map is not the territory," argued that humans are prone to confusing words with the things they describe. We say tree and forget that the word is just a sound, a placeholder for something too intricate to fully describe. Every label is an invitation to oversimplify. Every model is a temptation to stop looking deeper. Take the field of psychology. Diagnostic categories are essential tools, but they are just that, tools. They are maps, not territories. Depression isn't the same in any two people. Trauma doesn't unfold in identical patterns. The territory of a person's experience is vast, tangled, and often beyond the scope of any model. But when we forget that, we risk turning human lives into checklists. We start believing the labels are the person. And that is when compassion begins to erode, when curiosity is replaced by certainty. The same danger exists in politics, in religion, in science. We create ideologies that promise to explain everything, to chart the landscape of existence with perfect accuracy. But every ideology is a map with missing pieces. Every belief system has blind spots. The more certain you are that your map is the final word on reality, the more likely you are to dismiss or harm the people who live outside your conceptual boundaries. History is littered with the wreckage of systems that mistook themselves for reality, systems that destroyed what didn't fit their model. Even in your own private life, this fallacy can quietly poison your sense of what's possible. When you tell yourself you are a failure, or unlovable, or not the kind of person who deserves good things, you're using a map, an internal model, to navigate your experience. But that map was often drawn by other people's expectations, or by old wounds that never fully healed. It doesn't account for your capacity to change, your potential to surprise yourself, your resilience in the face of pain. When you believe the map is the territory, you imprison yourself in a version of reality that may never have been true. Next time you catch yourself thinking you have someone figured out, pause. Ask yourself, is this knowledge or is this a comfortable story? Is this an honest recognition of complexity, or just the easiest way to stop feeling uncertain? Real understanding requires humility, the courage to admit you don't know everything, and maybe never will. It requires you to step off the map and into the raw, unpredictable terrain of actual experience. Consider how this plays out in relationships. When you first meet someone, you build a model of them in your mind, a collection of impressions, stories, and assumptions. Over time, that model starts to feel real, but if you never question it, you stop noticing who they are becoming. You don't see the subtle shifts in their hopes or the private struggles they don't voice. You react to your version of them, not to the person standing in front of you. And slowly the relationship withers under the weight of your certainty. The irony is that the better a model works, the more invisible its distortions become. If a map is accurate enough to guide you most of the time, you rarely think to question where it might fail. But life is full of unexpected detours. No map can predict every sudden change, every hidden possibility. And the only way to stay alive to those possibilities is to remember, always, that the model is never the thing itself. You are not your labels. Other people are not their categories. The world is not your theory of the world. To live as though the map were the territory is to flatten your existence into something smaller, duller, and more predictable than it ever needs to be. So learn to hold your models lightly. Use them as guides, not prisons, and never forget to step into the uncharted territory where the most vivid truths are waiting to be discovered. The time is linear belief. You live each day believing time moves in a straight line. You wake, you act, you sleep, and you expect tomorrow to be new, unshackled by yesterday's weight. But this belief is more comforting than it is true. Time doesn't always flow forward. Sometimes it loops back, stitching memories to moments you wish you had outgrown. Sometimes it coils inside you, so that no matter how many calendars you burn through, you remain trapped in the same hidden chamber where an old hurt keeps breathing. The idea of linear time is a polite fiction, a way to pretend you are progressing even as parts of you stay exactly where they first broke. Think about a memory so potent it still pulls at your pulse years later. Maybe it was a moment of betrayal, the instant you realized love had an expiration date, or the day you were told you were not enough, too small, too flawed, too late. In the physical world, that event is over. The clock has advanced, the calendar has turned, but inside your body, it is still happening. The same chemicals flood your bloodstream whenever you recall it. Your chest tightens. Your breath shallows. Your nervous system can't tell the difference between the memory and the present. This is the secret truth. Time within your biology is non-linear. It respects no clocks, no calendars, no narratives of progress. Trauma is the most vivid evidence of time refusing to move forward. When you experience something too overwhelming for your mind to process, it does not get neatly filed away. Instead, it becomes a looping reel of unfinished sensations, an echo without an ending. You can be sitting in a safe room, years after the danger has passed, and your body will still brace for impact. Your heart will still pound as if you're about to be hurt. No amount of logic can convince your cells that time has moved on. This is why healing is not about forgetting. It is about learning to integrate these fragments so they stop ambushing you from the shadows. But it isn't only trauma that makes time collapse. Nostalgia does it too. The scent of a certain perfume, the chords of an old song, the sight of a place you thought you'd never return to, these can dissolve the illusion of chronological order. Suddenly you are 12 again, or 25, or standing in a kitchen where the light fell a certain way. You are reminded that the past is not behind you. It is layered inside you, waiting to be reawakened by the slightest cue. This isn't sentimentality. It's proof that time is more like a field than a road. You stand in the middle, surrounded by everything you've ever felt. Even your future can collapse into the present. You've felt this when you've sensed dread long before anything happened, when your intuition whispered that something was coming, or when a dream showed you a fragment of what later unfolded. Science struggles to measure this, but countless people have stories that defy linear time, premonition, déjà vu, the eerie certainty you've already been here before. The mind is not a machine bound by the arrow of time. It is more like an antenna, picking up signals from multiple directions at once. Consider the way your body marks time. You might look in the mirror and see new lines on your face. You think this means you've aged, but inside, parts of you remain ageless. The wonder you felt the first time you tasted freedom, the sorrow that first taught you about loss. These versions of you never disappear. They are all still here, influencing your reactions, your choices, the words you can't quite say. You are not a single self moving along a timeline. You are a constellation of selves, each caught in their own moment, each alive in their own small eternity. This is why some days feel longer than others, even though the clocks insist they all last 24 hours. A single afternoon of heartbreak can feel endless. An hour of bliss can evaporate before you can name it. Time bends according to the weight of experience. It is elastic, subjective, personal. The belief that it moves in a tidy line is something you were taught so you wouldn't get lost in its strange folds. But you are already living in those folds. You always have been. If you want to understand who you really are, you must look beyond the linear story you tell yourself. You must notice where your mind keeps returning, where your heart still flinches, where your body still expects what happened long ago. Healing begins when you recognize that time inside you doesn't obey the same laws as time on a clock. It begins when you stop insisting you should be over something simply because the calendar says enough days have passed. When you feel haunted by an old moment, remember, it isn't a sign of weakness. It is a sign that your mind and body are honest in ways your intellect tries to deny. They don't care about appearances. They don't care about the timeline you share with others. They care about truth. And the truth is, you are living in many times at once. This doesn't mean you are doomed to remain stuck. But it does mean that moving forward requires more than telling yourself to forget. It requires compassion for the parts of you that are still there, still trying to finish their story. It requires courage to stand in the present and acknowledge the echoes without letting them become your prison. So, the next time you feel time unravel, when an old memory hijacks your senses or the future sends a shiver down your spine, don't fight it. Witness it. Learn from it. Because time is not a line. It is a living, breathing landscape, and you are free to explore every corner of it without shame. The identity is fixed trick. You were taught to think of yourself as a single, coherent identity, a fixed self that persists across time. But if you look closely, you'll see that this is a comforting illusion. Your mind is more like a collection of fragments stitched together by memory and habit. The person you are when you're alone in the dark is not the same as the one who shows up in a job interview or the version that comforts a grieving friend. These shifts aren't evidence of hypocrisy. They are proof of your complexity. You adapt to survive, to belong, to feel safe. Each context activates different patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior. When you walk into a room where everyone expects you to be confident, your body tightens, your voice sharpens. Your manner becomes decisive. But when you return to a space where you are uncertain, the confident self dissolves, replaced by hesitation. You might feel like an imposter because the version you prefer isn't always the one that shows up. But none of these selves are any less real. They are all you, coexisting. You are a shapeshifter, responding to forces seen and unseen. Some versions were born in childhood, forged by fear or praise. Others emerged later, sculpted by love, trauma, ambition, or grief. You call them all I because you need a simple story. But this story conceals a kaleidoscope of selves. This is why you sometimes feel divided inside. One part of you wants to take a risk. Another wants to hide. One part dreams of freedom, another clings to certainty. These are not illusions. They are living currents in your consciousness. You are not one thing. You are a dynamic process, fluid, unfinished. This is why personal growth feels so turbulent. When you change, some versions of you resist because their survival depends on staying the same. Imagine the self you created to please your parents or avoid punishment. That self believes it must always be agreeable. It will fight any impulse to speak your truth because it was built to protect you from rejection. Or think of the self that emerged when you were betrayed. It learned to be vigilant, to expect disappointment. Even in safe relationships, it flinches. You can't heal by pretending you have only one identity. You heal by recognizing all your parts and understanding what shaped them. You are an ecosystem of selves, each with a purpose. Some defend, some hope, some sabotage. But when you deny their existence, you split yourself in two: the acceptable and the hidden. This fragmentation fuels shame. You wonder why you can't always be consistent, why you can't be the best version every day, but you were never meant to be one static self. That idea is a cultural myth. It makes life neater, but also more cruel. It tells you that any deviation is a defect. That is a lie. Your multiplicity is not a flaw. It is evidence of your mind's genius for adaptation. Even your contradictions are honest. You love and fear, you trust and doubt. You long for connection and crave solitude. These tensions prove that you are alive, responsive, conscious. To know yourself is not to discover a single core, but to become fluent in all yourselves and to learn when each appears. This fluency is how you build integrity, not by forcing sameness, but by choosing awareness. You are many, and that is your strength. The truth equals safety myth. You've been told your whole life that the truth is a kind of salvation, that if you uncover it, you'll be liberated, that knowing is always better than not knowing. But no one warns you that sometimes the truth doesn't set you free in the way you imagined. Sometimes it detonates your illusions so completely that you're left picking through the rubble of everything you believed about yourself, about the people you love, about the world you thought was safe. This is the truth equals safety myth, a story we tell ourselves to feel brave, when in reality, the truth is often a blade that cuts in both directions. Think about the stories we repeat. That honesty is always noble, that secrets are poison, that transparency is a cure. These ideas are comforting because they make the world feel simple. But the reality is that some truths break you before they build you. A child who discovers a parent's betrayal is not freed instantly by that knowledge. They often feel unmoored, as if the ground has dissolved under their feet. The betrayal doesn't just reveal a hidden fact. It forces them to question every memory, every moment of trust, every story they used to feel safe. Consider the whistleblowers in history. People who uncovered corruption, injustice, hidden crimes. They are often celebrated after the fact, turned into symbols of courage. But what's usually left out is the devastation that followed their revelations. When Daniel Ellsberg leaked the Pentagon Papers, he exposed years of government deceit about the Vietnam War. But he also became a target of surveillance, prosecution, and public scorn. The truth he revealed was necessary, but it destroyed his old life. It is easy to admire whistleblowers from a distance. It is harder to grapple with the reality that telling the truth can cost you everything you thought you were protecting. Sometimes the truth you uncover is about yourself. You discover you are capable of cruelty. You realize you've been living a lie. You see how your fear or your ambition has hurt the people who mattered most. This kind of truth does not arrive wrapped in redemption. It often comes with shame so heavy you feel you might drown under it. The safety myth tells you that if you confess or confront these things, you will be instantly transformed. But healing is not that linear. Sometimes the truth is only the beginning of the real work, the long, difficult process of reconciling who you thought you were with who you really are. Even in relationships, the myth persists. We say that radical honesty will deepen intimacy, that secrets corrode love. But it's possible to wield the truth like a weapon. A confession offered without care for timing or impact can shatter another person's heart in the name of authenticity. There is a difference between truth as a bridge and truth as a bomb. Knowing when to speak and when to hold silence requires wisdom. Most of us learn only through the wreckage left behind. The truth is rarely safe. It is disruptive by nature. It demands change. It strips away comforting fictions. That is why so many institutions depend on controlling it. Religions, governments, corporations, each has its own curated version of reality, designed to keep people compliant. When someone starts asking questions, the first response is often denial or punishment, because when you see the truth, you become unpredictable. You stop playing your assigned role, and that makes you dangerous. In the personal realm, the truth equals safety myth is seductive because it offers certainty. If you can just find the truth, you will finally feel secure. But humans are not built for endless certainty. Our minds crave stories that reassure us, that make sense of chaos. When those stories collapse, we are left in the void. Sometimes we rebuild stronger. Sometimes we simply break. Ask yourself, what truths are you avoiding because you suspect they would destroy something you rely on? What secrets have you kept because you feared the fallout more than the lie itself? These are the places where the myth shows its teeth. When you decide to pursue truth anyway, understand what you are inviting. You are stepping into a territory with no guarantees. You may lose relationships, status, or a sense of belonging. You may find that what you uncover leaves you more isolated than you were before. But you may also discover a different kind of freedom, the freedom that comes not from safety, but from living without illusion. It is not an easy freedom. It does not feel clean or triumphant, but it is real. And in time, it can become the foundation for something more honest, more resilient than the comfort you had before. The intuition is always right bias. You are told to trust your gut. You hear it in motivational speeches and self-help books and well-meaning advice. Follow your intuition because it always knows. And part of you wants to believe that there is a compass inside you, perfectly calibrated to point toward truth. You want to believe that your feelings are messages from something wiser, something pure, something beyond the reach of confusion. But what no one tells you is that trauma feels like intuition too. And sometimes, the voice you call instinct is only the echo of an old wound replaying itself in your body. Imagine walking into a room and feeling a rush of dread so powerful you almost turn around and leave. Your heart races, your chest tightens, and every signal in your body screams that something is wrong. You think, this must be my intuition protecting me. But what if it is not? What if it is the part of you that learned long ago that certain situations mean danger, even when no threat exists? What if it is the nervous system still stuck in survival mode, interpreting neutrality as hostility, interpreting ambiguity as rejection? The truth is, your body stores every experience you've ever had. It remembers the moments you were abandoned, the moments you were shamed, the moments you were powerless. Those memories are not always obvious. They live in sensations you cannot explain, reactions that feel automatic. You call them intuition because they arrive without conscious thought. But not all automatic feelings are guidance. Some are simply reflexes. Some are evidence of what hurt you. Think about how many times you have felt an instant attraction to someone who turned out to be wrong for you. It felt electric, inevitable. Your whole body lit up with recognition. But recognition is not always wisdom. Sometimes you are drawn to what is familiar, not what is good. Sometimes you mistake the intensity of the feeling for proof that it is true. You think, I must follow this because my intuition is never wrong. And so you repeat old patterns, mistaking the comfort of repetition for destiny. This is the bias no one talks about, the belief that because something feels immediate and visceral, it must be true. We rarely stop to ask whether our instincts have been shaped by experiences that distorted our sense of safety. We rarely question whether our gut reactions are actually echoes of moments when we had no power to choose differently. We just assume that intuition is a kind of sacred signal, above scrutiny, beyond examination. But wisdom is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quieter voice beneath the reflex. Sometimes it is the part of you willing to pause and ask, is this intuition or is this fear? Is this truth or is this a memory trying to keep me safe in the wrong way? Consider the person who grew up in chaos. To them, calm feels suspicious. Safety feels like boredom. Stability feels like a trap. When they encounter a healthy relationship, their body doesn't say yes. It says, run. Their gut tells them something is off. But what is off is not the relationship. It is their nervous system, wired to expect volatility. If they mistake that feeling for intuition, they will walk away from what could heal them. The mind craves certainty, and intuition feels certain. It is seductive to believe that if you just listen to your gut, you will never be deceived. But sometimes, your gut is the most deceptive part of you. Sometimes, your gut is simply the part that remembers pain and tries to avoid anything that reminds it of that pain, even if it means avoiding what is good for you. There is nothing shameful about this. It is human. It is a consequence of surviving. But if you want to live a life guided by something deeper than reflex, you must be willing to question your feelings, not worship them. You must be willing to sit with discomfort and ask where it comes from. You must be willing to consider that the sensations you call intuition might be the residue of trauma that never learned to stand down. This does not mean you should dismiss every instinct. Sometimes your body really is warning you. Sometimes intuition is accurate, a reflection of accumulated wisdom. But discernment is essential. Discernment requires curiosity. It requires that you be humble enough to say, I don't know if this feeling is truth or fear. I don't know if this reaction is insight or habit. And that humility can save you from repeating the same cycles forever. The next time you feel that rush of certainty, the one that says, go or run or hide, pause, take a breath. Ask yourself, does this feeling align with my values or does it only align with my history? Is this the voice of my highest self or is it the voice of the child who had no choice but to survive? When you start to make space for these questions, you loosen the grip of the bias that tells you intuition is infallible. You begin to see that truth is not always loud. Sometimes, it is the quiet clarity that emerges after the first wave of feeling subsides. Sometimes, it is the calm that comes when you realize you have more options than you once believed. You are not obligated to obey every impulse that feels urgent. You are allowed to pause, to reflect, to choose. Real wisdom is not reflexive, it is deliberate. It is curious. It is willing to look beyond the familiar into something unknown. When you can do that, you free yourself from the tyranny of the unexamined instinct. You step into a life where your choices are not dictated by echoes of old pain, but guided by a deeper clarity that grows stronger each time you dare to question what feels automatic. The knowledge prevents harm illusion. You've been taught to believe that knowledge is the ultimate shield, that the more you know, the safer you'll be. That if you can just collect enough facts, enough strategies, enough warnings, you can somehow outrun pain, avoid regret, and outmaneuver every loss waiting around the corner. But this is a comforting illusion. Knowledge does not always protect you. Sometimes, it does the opposite. It builds a fortress around your mind so thick with information that you can't see your own instincts anymore. You think knowing is the same as preparing, but information and preparation are not the same thing. You can memorize every symptom of an illness and still be paralyzed with fear the day you actually feel it. You can study every psychological theory and still be defenseless when heartbreak splits your chest open. You can analyze every possible outcome, draft every contingency plan, and still find yourself unable to act when it matters most. Because knowledge is not wisdom. Knowledge is not courage. Knowledge is not experience. Think about how easily this illusion takes hold. You read an article about the risks of failure, and suddenly you think that awareness will insulate you from ever failing. You watch a documentary about disaster preparedness and feel a surge of certainty that you're now immune to chaos. But if you never practice, if you never engage with real stakes, all that information just becomes a buffer that separates you from the messy, unpredictable nature of living. Consider the person who spends years studying relationships, attachment theory, communication styles, compatibility frameworks. They know every red flag by heart. They can recite 100 ways love can go wrong. But when someone finally offers them genuine affection, they hesitate. They dissect every word, every gesture, searching for hidden motives. They replay conversations, second-guess their own feelings, and eventually withdraw in exhaustion. They never let themselves be known because their knowledge taught them to expect harm in every interaction. And in trying to protect themselves from being hurt, they ensure they never experience real connection. Or think of the person who tries to master their health by consuming endless medical information. They learn about rare conditions, statistical anomalies, catastrophic worst-case scenarios, and instead of feeling empowered, they become convinced that every ache is the first symptom of disaster. They don't feel safer, they feel sicker. Their body becomes a threat, a puzzle to be solved rather than a life to be inhabited. This is what happens when knowledge becomes a form of control, an attempt to outthink vulnerability. But Life is not a problem you can solve by gathering enough data. Life is not an equation that yields to perfect analysis. Sometimes, more information just feeds your fear until it becomes unmanageable. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop researching and start living. Overthinking doesn't just paralyze, it also blinds. When you collect too many perspectives, you lose your own. You become so tangled in what everyone else has discovered that you forget to trust what you already know. You second-guess every impulse, every desire, every intuition, and in that state of chronic hesitation, you become incapable of meaningful action. You mistake constant rumination for progress, but in reality, you are running in circles, trapped in an illusion of productivity that keeps you from ever moving forward. Think about how often you delay decisions in the name of gathering more information. You tell yourself you'll start the project once you've read one more book. You'll leave the toxic relationship once you're sure you understand every possible repercussion. You'll take the leap once you've exhausted every angle. But that moment never comes, because no amount of knowledge can erase uncertainty. No amount of preparation can guarantee safety, and deep down, you already know that. Knowledge becomes an idol, a false god you worship in the hope that it will absolve you of risk. But there is no life without risk. There is no love without exposure. There is no growth without the possibility of failure. The more you try to fill every gap in your understanding, the more you starve the part of you that thrives in the unknown. Even in the smallest moments, this illusion seeps in. You check reviews before buying anything. You research every symptom before seeing a doctor. You read endless opinions before forming your own. You believe this vigilance will spare you regret. But in reality, it often breeds a different regret, the regret of never having trusted your own judgment. Wisdom is not the accumulation of endless facts. Wisdom is the ability to discern which information is useful and which is noise. It is knowing when to pause and when to act. It is learning to sit with the discomfort of partial understanding and still choose anyway. It is the courage to accept that sometimes you will be wrong and that being wrong is not the end of your story. The knowledge prevents harm. Illusion thrives because it feels safer to remain in research mode than to step into action. But safety is not the same as aliveness. When you hide behind information, you forfeit the possibility of transformation. You become a collector of insights rather than a participant in your own life. Next time you catch yourself stalling in the name of knowledge, ask yourself what you are really afraid of. Is it failure? Is it loss? Is it the feeling of being out of control? And then ask yourself whether all this information is truly helping you, or whether it has become another way to avoid the vulnerability of experience. Remember, no amount of study will spare you from being human. No amount of certainty will erase the unknown. The point of learning is not to avoid life's messiness, but to meet it with open eyes and an open heart. You are allowed to step forward before you feel ready. You are allowed to act before you are sure. You are allowed to trust yourself, even when you don't have all the answers. Because the truth is, nobody ever does. And that is not a weakness. It is what makes life possible. The healing means happiness trap. You were taught that healing is a straight road leading to happiness, that if you do enough work, read enough books, meditate, forgive, and let go, you will arrive at some permanent state of joy. This story is comforting because it gives you something to strive toward, an endpoint, a reward, a promise, that all this struggle will finally be over. But healing does not work that way. Healing is not a clean progression from suffering to bliss. It is a constant disordered process that will break your heart open over and over before it ever feels like relief. Healing is not a doorway you pass through to find yourself permanently safe. It is a messy, infinite house with rooms you never knew existed, each holding different shades of grief, anger, tenderness, and fleeting joy. When you set out to heal, you may imagine that it will look like progress, that each layer you peel away will reveal something lighter, something easier to bear. But often, the opposite is true. Healing means remembering what you spent years trying to forget. It means sitting with the raw truth of your pain without numbing it or dressing it up in spiritual platitudes. You will find that healing is not about erasing wounds, but acknowledging them so completely that they lose their power to define you. This is not the same as happiness. This is not the same as closure. Sometimes it is simply the dignity of admitting what happened and how it hurt you. You might think you are failing when you revisit old sadness, when anger you thought you had released surges back in your chest, when your loneliness feels as bottomless as it did the first time. But this isn't failure. This is the shape of real healing, cyclical, unpredictable, without a final climax. You can grieve something again and again, each time discovering a new edge you didn't see before. You can love someone and still feel rage at what they took from you. You can forgive and still remember. You can feel gratitude and still wish it had been different. Healing is not a single feeling. It is the capacity to hold all of these contradictions without pretending they cancel each other out. The culture you live in tells you that if you are not happy, you are not well. But this belief can turn healing itself into another performance, another reason to judge yourself for feeling what is natural. If you expect healing to look like constant serenity, you will think something is wrong with you when you feel the familiar ache return. You will wonder if you are broken beyond repair because you are not smiling all the time. But the truth is, you were never meant to live in perpetual joy. You are meant to be fully alive, and aliveness includes every emotion: sorrow, delight, rage, confusion, hope, despair, wonder. Imagine a person recovering from the end of a relationship. They spend years believing they will be healed once they can think of their former partner without sadness. They measure their progress by how close they feel to indifference. But one day, they catch a glimpse of an old photograph and the grief returns, as sharp as ever. In that moment, they might believe they have lost all the ground they gained. But in reality, this is just another room in the house, one they hadn't opened in a while. It doesn't mean they haven't healed. It means healing is deeper and more complex than they understood. Or think of the person working to recover from childhood trauma. They go to therapy, learn to set boundaries, find compassion for the younger self who survived. There are days when they feel whole, like the pain has finally receded. But then a smell, a phrase, a tone of voice pulls them back, and their body reacts as if no time has passed. Their hands shake, their heart pounds. If they believe healing equals happiness, they will see this moment as proof they have failed. But if they understand that healing is not a straight line, they can recognize it as another layer being revealed, another chance to tend to the wound with gentleness instead of shame. Healing is grief. It is the grief of realizing how much you lost, how much you never received, how much time you spent believing you didn't deserve better. It is the grief of knowing you can never go back and protect the person you once were. It is the pain of letting go of old stories that felt like survival, even when they were small and cruel. This grief is not the enemy. It is a companion that shows up because you are finally strong enough to feel what you could not feel before. Joy does come, but it doesn't arrive as a permanent resident. It visits like any other guest, sometimes unexpected, sometimes shy, sometimes loud and glorious. You will find yourself laughing on a day you thought would be only tears. You will feel your chest open with a sudden sense of peace in the middle of your sorrow. You will realize you can hold both the ache and the gratitude at the same time. But you will also learn that joy will leave again. And that doesn't mean you are broken or that your work was wasted. It means you are alive in the full spectrum of being human. If you want to heal, you must let go of the fantasy that it will end in permanent happiness. You must be willing to sit in the rooms that hurt, to open the boxes you packed away, to feel the weight of everything you survived. You must learn to trust that feeling doesn't mean drowning, that grief is a wave that recedes if you let it move through you instead of locking it behind the door. You must give yourself permission to measure healing not by how happy you are, but by how honest you are willing to be. Because healing is not about erasing pain. It is about expanding your capacity to hold it without losing your center. It is about growing a heart big enough to contain your own contradictions. It is about learning to meet every version of yourself, the broken, the hopeful, the angry, the forgiving, and making space for them to coexist without shame. You will never arrive at a finish line where all your wounds disappear, but you will find that over time, they soften. They become part of your story, not the definition of it. You will still have days when you ache, but you will also have days when you feel the beauty of being here, alive, able to feel it all. And in that vast, imperfect experience, you will find something more lasting than happiness. You will find the truth of your own resilience and the quiet freedom of knowing you don't have to be any particular way to be worthy of love. The morality is universal lie. You have been taught to believe that morality is a universal compass guiding humanity toward the same shining North Star. You were told that good is good, evil is evil, and no amount of argument or circumstance can blur the line between them. But this story is an illusion. Morality is not a fixed law etched into the cosmos. It is a shifting tapestry, woven from time, culture, power, and perception. What one generation worships as virtue, another condemns as barbaric. What one culture sees as justice, another names atrocity. Consider history. There were times when burning someone alive was called righteous purification, when conquest and enslavement were framed as moral duties, when honor demanded the duel and piety demanded the stake. These were not isolated lapses. They were the moral codes of entire societies. People followed them with conviction. They slept well, believing their actions were good, because the voices around them said so. Now, think of your own time. You may feel certain that your values are more enlightened, more compassionate, more correct. But so did the generations before you. So will the generations after you. And they will look back at some of your most cherished norms with horror or disbelief. This is the pattern. Morality masquerades as absolute, but it is always a reflection of human perspective. Even within a single lifetime, your ideas of right and wrong transform. What you once believed was unforgivable may become understandable when you stand in someone else's shoes. What you once excused as necessary may start to look like cruelty when you learn more. Morality is not a single blade slicing clean through reality. It is a lens, and the angle from which you look determines what you see. If you think about power, the illusion becomes even clearer. Those who hold authority often shape morality to justify their interests. Laws are passed that sanctify exploitation, war, or inequality, while claiming to protect the common good. History is crowded with examples of moral codes that were really tools of control. People were taught that questioning them was wicked, so they obeyed, believing they were righteous. In this way, morality becomes a performance, a costume that power wears to disguise self-interest as virtue. This is not to say that all moral feelings are false. You feel empathy, outrage, compassion, remorse. These are real and often beautiful. But even these emotions are shaped by context. You are more likely to feel empathy for someone who looks like you or shares your language. You are quicker to excuse harm if it benefits your group. These biases are ancient, woven into human survival. Yet, they show how easily morality bends around tribal instinct. You might believe you are objective, that your judgments come from a place of universal truth. But watch what happens when you stand at the crossroads of conflicting loyalties. When your family's welfare clashes with your ethical principles, when your nation's interests collide with your ideals, suddenly the clarity dissolves, and you see how morality is often negotiated, not revealed. Even philosophers who dedicate their lives to defining universal ethics end up in endless debate. One says morality is about consequences. Another says it's about intention. Another says it's about duty. And each theory has loopholes and contradictions. The search for a perfect moral framework remains unfinished because no perspective can escape the limits of human experience. If you believe morality is universal, you will inevitably condemn those whose context you don't understand. You will mistake difference for depravity. You will imagine yourself as an agent of truth when you are really an agent of perspective. But if you recognize that morality morphs, you open the door to humility. You can hold your values firmly while admitting they are not the final word. You can advocate for justice without pretending your vision of it is immune to error. You can ask, who benefits from this moral rule? Who suffers? Whose voice has been excluded? This doesn't mean you must abandon principles or live in moral relativism. It means you must stay alert to the forces that shape your convictions. It means understanding that good and evil are often more a matter of angle than of truth carved in stone. When you see that, you will become harder to manipulate. You will be less seduced by leaders who claim they alone hold the keys to moral certainty. You will have the courage to question, even when questioning is uncomfortable. You will discover that real integrity is not about enforcing universal dogma, but about staying awake to your own fallibility. So when you feel the rush of righteousness, pause. When you are certain that you stand on the side of the absolute good, pause again. Remember that morality is a story humans keep rewriting. To know this is not to despair. It is to begin the work of choosing your values consciously, with both the effort = success belief. You grew up believing that hard work always pays off, that if you just apply yourself, if you sacrifice and persist, you will inevitably be rewarded. This is the story that fuels entire economies, that keeps people waking up before dawn, that justifies the endless grind. But the truth is more complicated. The belief that effort guarantees success is not just simplistic, it's dangerous, because it blinds you to all the forces that shape outcomes without ever asking for your consent. Think about the child who grows up in poverty. She might work twice as hard as her wealthier classmates. She might study late into the night, never take a vacation, pour her energy into every assignment. But her school may have fewer resources, her neighborhood fewer connections, her family less stability. And when she fails to reach the same milestones, she will be told she didn't try hard enough. Hat's story is a lie. Effort matters, but it does not erase the structural barriers that privilege protects. Consider the millions who migrate across borders searching for opportunity. They believe if they endure the hardship, if they labor in fields or factories, if they save every dollar, they will eventually secure a better future. And some do. But many are crushed under the weight of policies designed to exploit them while denying their humanity. Their effort is real. Their sacrifice is undeniable. Yet the system was never built to reward them equally. Even in the corporate world, where meritocracy is supposedly sacred, outcomes are shaped by invisible advantages. The right family connections, the right accent, the right university brand. These are all multipliers that have nothing to do with work ethic. Studies show that people who look the part of a leader are promoted faster, regardless of actual skill. That timing, a chance project, a new boss, a sudden vacancy, can launch a career while others stagnate. Luck is the variable no one wants to admit, because if success depends on luck, then failure can happen to anyone, and that is terrifying. So we cling to the myth that hard work makes us invulnerable. We call billionaires geniuses, not lottery winners. We pretend every entrepreneur started from nothing, conveniently ignoring the capital and safety nets that cushion their risks. This myth is seductive because it feels fair. If effort equals success, then the world has order. But the moment you look deeper, you see the cracks. You see brilliant artists who never find an audience. You see single parents working 3 jobs and still falling behind. You see entire communities locked out of prosperity because of factors they did not choose. In history, revolutions have erupted when too many people realized that effort alone would never be enough. During the industrial age, workers believed that loyalty and discipline would secure stability. Instead, they were discarded when profits demanded it. When they protested, they were called ungrateful, as if their suffering was a personal failing rather than the inevitable result of a rigged game. And yet, effort still matters. It can shape character, build resilience, forge meaning, but it does not guarantee external success. That is why some of the hardest working people on Earth remain invisible. Because the systems that determine reward are not interested in fairness. They are designed to preserve advantage. Ask yourself, who benefits from the effort equals success belief? Who profits when you blame yourself for forces beyond your control? When you internalize failure as evidence of your weakness instead of evidence of structural injustice, you become easier to manage. You are less likely to question, less likely to rebel, more likely to keep grinding in the hope that one day your time will come. This is why the myth is so pervasive. Because it keeps economies humming, corporations profitable, hierarchies stable, and because it flatters those who have succeeded. If you believe your effort alone explains your wealth, you never have to confront how much was given to you before you even began. But what happens when you let the myth go? When you accept that outcomes are shaped by timing, privilege, and luck as much as by effort? Paradoxically, that acceptance can be freeing because it allows you to measure your worth by more than your productivity. It opens space to care for yourself without guilt. It makes room for solidarity with those whose paths have been harder, whose effort has been just as fierce. This doesn't mean you stop trying. It means you try with clear eyes. You learn to see the machinery behind success and failure. You stop blaming yourself for every closed door. And you stop worshiping those who happen to find theirs open. Because real dignity doesn't come from pretending you control everything. It comes from showing up fully, even when you know the deck is stacked. It comes from refusing to measure human value by output alone. In the end, the effort equals success belief is comforting precisely because it is incomplete. True wisdom requires holding 2 truths at once, that your choices matter and that the world is not fair, that you can shape your path and that luck will always have the final word. And in that tension, you may finally find a more honest kind of hope. The money buys freedom trap. You were taught to believe that money is the ultimate key to freedom, that if you just earned enough, saved enough, accumulated enough, you would finally be able to breathe without fear. You would wake up every day unburdened by the weight of obligation, free to choose your own path without compromise. You were told that wealth was the antidote to powerlessness, but no one explained how easily the pursuit of wealth becomes its own prison, how often the desire to be free transforms into an endless cycle of earning, accumulating, and protecting what you have gained. The illusion begins subtly. You start by telling yourself that you are working hard for a noble purpose: security, independence, a better future for yourself or your family. But the deeper you sink into the game, the more you find that security always feels just out of reach. Every milestone achieved only creates a new standard you must maintain. Every raise becomes an obligation to perform at a higher level. Every asset acquired becomes something you must defend. What once felt like freedom starts to feel like captivity. Imagine the executive who once dreamed of retiring early. They amass wealth beyond what they ever imagined, but the cost is their time, their health, their relationships. Their identity fuses with their status. Now, walking away feels impossible. Their freedom is measured in numbers, but no number ever feels safe enough to stop striving. Or consider the artist who once created for love of the work. They achieve commercial success, and suddenly, every creative choice is weighed against market expectations. The audience that once felt like liberation now feels like a silent jury. The money that was supposed to enable expression becomes the force that polices it. This is the trap no one warns you about. The moment money becomes your sole strategy for freedom, you are always at risk of surrendering the very autonomy you crave. Because wealth is not neutral. It is entangled with power, status, and the fear of losing them. It incentivizes you to stay silent when speaking out might cost you influence. It tempts you to comply when resistance might threaten your position. Many people imagine that with enough money, they will finally be able to say whatever they believe. But look closely at those who have climbed the highest. You will often find that their freedom of speech has been replaced with a careful performance of neutrality. Silence becomes profitable. Compliance becomes currency. You learn to measure every truth against its potential cost, until honesty itself feels reckless. This is how golden cages are built. Not with bars of iron, but with comforts you are too afraid to jeopardize. You justify your restraint as strategic. You tell yourself you are protecting your legacy, your future, your reputation. But the more you trade authenticity for security, the less free you become. True freedom does not come solely from the size of your bank account. It comes from the courage to choose what matters over what is convenient. It comes from the ability to act in alignment with your values, even when doing so carries consequences. Money can create options, but it cannot replace integrity. There is nothing inherently wrong with wealth. Money can ease suffering, it can open doors, it can buy time, but it is also a force that amplifies your deepest fears and attachments. If you believe you are only worthy when you are successful, no amount of wealth will ever feel safe. If you believe you must always prove your value through accumulation, you will never rest. You will become a prisoner of your own ambition. The culture celebrates those who hustle endlessly. We praise the sacrifice, the relentlessness, the willingness to do whatever it takes. But what we rarely talk about is how many people wake up in the middle of the night wondering why they still feel empty. How many people wonder why, despite everything they have achieved, they feel less free than when they started. The money buys freedom trap. You were taught to believe that money is the ultimate key to freedom, that if you just earned enough, saved enough, accumulated enough, you would finally be able to breathe without fear. You would wake up every day unburdened by the weight of obligation, free to choose your own path without compromise. You were told that wealth was the antidote to powerlessness, but no one explained how easily the pursuit of wealth becomes its own prison, how often the desire to be free transforms into an endless cycle of earning, accumulating, and protecting what you have gained. The illusion begins subtly. You start by telling yourself that you are working hard for a noble purpose: security, independence, a better future for yourself or your family. But the deeper you sink into the game, the more you find that security always feels just out of reach. Every milestone achieved only creates a new standard you must maintain. Every raise becomes an obligation to perform at a higher level. Every asset acquired becomes something you must defend. What once felt like freedom starts to feel like captivity. Imagine the executive who once dreamed of retiring early. They amass wealth beyond what they ever imagined. But the cost is their time, their health, their relationships. Their identity fuses with their status. Now, walking away feels impossible. Their freedom is measured in numbers, but no number ever feels safe enough to stop striving. Or consider the artist who once created for love of the work. They achieve commercial success, and suddenly, every creative choice is weighed against market expectations. The audience that once felt like liberation now feels like a silent jury. The money that was supposed to enable expression becomes the force that polices it. This is the trap no one warns you about. The moment money becomes your sole strategy for freedom, you are always at risk of surrendering the very autonomy you crave. Because wealth is not neutral. It is entangled with power, status, and the fear of losing them. It incentivizes you to stay silent when speaking out might cost you influence. It tempts you to comply when resistance might threaten your position. Many people imagine that with enough money, they will finally be able to say whatever they believe. But look closely at those who have climbed the highest. You will often find that their freedom of speech has been replaced with a careful performance of neutrality. Silence becomes profitable. Compliance becomes currency. You learn to measure every truth against its potential cost, until honesty itself feels reckless. This is how golden cages are built. Not with bars of iron, but with comforts you are too afraid to jeopardize. You justify your restraint as strategic. You tell yourself you are protecting your legacy, your future, your reputation. But the more you trade authenticity for security, the less free you become. True freedom does not come solely from the size of your bank account. It comes from the courage to choose what matters over what is convenient. It comes from the ability to act in alignment with your values, even when doing so carries consequences. Money can create options, but it cannot replace integrity. There is nothing inherently wrong with wealth. Money can ease suffering, it can open doors, it can buy time, but it is also a force that amplifies your deepest fears and attachments. If you believe you are only worthy when you are successful, no amount of wealth will ever feel safe. If you believe you must always prove your value through accumulation, you will never rest. You will become a prisoner of your own ambition. The culture celebrates those who hustle endlessly. We praise the sacrifice, the relentlessness, the willingness to do whatever it takes. But what we rarely talk about is how many people wake up in the middle of the night wondering why they still feel empty. How many people wonder why, despite everything they have achieved, they feel less free than when they started. The "you are your mind" illusion. You wake up every morning inside a storm of thoughts. Before you even open your eyes, your mind begins its chatter, cataloging worries, replaying yesterday's conversations, inventing problems that haven't happened yet. And you think this voice is you. You think the mind is your identity, the final authority on who you are and what you feel. But this is an illusion that shapes almost every waking moment of your life. You are not just your mind. You are not only the language that loops inside your skull. You are a body that remembers what your intellect denies. You are a constellation of sensations, instincts, and memories that never fit neatly into thoughts. Consider how often you try to think your way out of pain. You analyze why you feel anxious. You dissect why you feel ashamed. You tell yourself that if you can find the right explanation, the suffering will vanish. But the body holds on to experiences long after the mind has rationalized them away. You can say, "I'm over it," but your chest still tightens when you hear their name. You can insist, "It doesn't matter," but your shoulders still tense when you walk into the same room where it happened. The mind can invent stories of closure, but the body keeps the score. This illusion is seductive because it flatters you. It tells you that if you can just think better thoughts, you can control everything. That if you can generate enough insight, you will never feel powerless again. But there are truths stored in your muscles, your breath, your heartbeat, that will never yield to thought alone. Sometimes, the more you intellectualize, the more you drift away from what's actually true. Imagine trying to understand a song by reading its sheet music without ever hearing it played. That is what it's like to live only in your mind. You reduce the richness of experience to symbols and logic. You convince yourself you understand the melody because you've memorized the notes, but the feeling, the resonance that can move you to tears, stays hidden. It only emerges when you stop thinking and allow yourself to feel. Think of the moments when your body spoke louder than your thoughts, when you felt dread before you could name it, when your gut clenched in the presence of a lie, when your skin bristled with recognition long before your mind understood why. These are reminders that you are more than the narrator in your head. You are an organism that perceives and responds in ways that can't be contained by language. And yet, we build entire cultures on the premise that thought is everything. We idolize intellect. We reward analysis, rationality, argument. We train children to prize the mind's mastery and dismiss the body's knowing as primitive or unreliable. We grow up believing that our worth is measured by how cleverly we can explain ourselves. But wisdom does not live only in the mind. It is embedded in the body's quiet intelligence, in the breath that steadies you when you're afraid, in the impulse to reach for comfort, in the goosebumps that announce awe before your mind can label it. This illusion takes root early. You learn to narrate your feelings instead of feeling them. You say, "I'm fine," while your heart pounds. You say, "I'm not angry," while your jaw locks tight. Over time, you become skilled at ignoring the evidence in your own flesh. You trust your thoughts to tell you how you feel, even when your body is telling you another story. And slowly, you drift from yourself. You become a spectator of your own life, observing, analyzing, but never fully inhabiting. Consider the person who intellectualizes every emotion. They are brilliant at describing why they hurt, but incapable of letting themselves grieve. They can pinpoint the origin of their shame, but never feel the release that comes when tears are allowed to flow. They believe understanding is enough, but understanding is only the doorway. To heal, you have to walk through it into the territory of sensation, surrender, and vulnerability. Or think of someone whose mind insists they are safe, but whose body tells a different story. They stand in front of a crowd, telling themselves, "I am confident," while their palms sweat and their voice trembles. They rehearse affirmations, but their heart races with ancient fear. This isn't weakness, it's biology. The body does not speak in affirmations. It speaks in sensations, impulses, and reflexes. And when you ignore it, you split yourself into fragments that no amount of thinking can stitch back together. The illusion that you are only your mind creates a lonely kind of existence. You start to believe that you must solve everything internally, that no one else can help you because they can't see the labyrinth of your thoughts. But connection is not built in the mind alone. It happens when you let someone witness the raw, unguarded reality beneath your explanations, when you allow your voice to shake, when you stop translating every feeling into a polished sentence and simply let it be. There is nothing wrong with thinking. The mind is a miraculous instrument. It can build civilizations, compose music, invent worlds out of nothing. But when you worship the mind as the entirety of who you are, you cut yourself off from the deeper currents of experience. You deny yourself the wisdom of your body, the clarity of your emotions, the simple truth of your animal aliveness. You are not just the observer behind your eyes. You are also the breath that rises and falls without your permission. You are the warmth in your chest when you love, the ache in your stomach when you grieve, the electricity in your spine when you dare to hope. You are every unspoken intuition, every flicker of sensation, every embodied truth your thoughts cannot capture. Next time you find yourself trapped in analysis, trying to outthink your own suffering, pause. Feel your feet on the floor. Notice the rhythm of your breath. Allow the sensations to be real without demanding they make sense. Because the mind will always offer stories, some true, some distorted. But the body never lies. The mind is just one room in the house of your being. Don't mistake it for the entire home. There is more to you than thought. There is more to life than understanding. And when you learn to trust the knowing that lives beyond language, you begin to come home to yourself. The sleep is laziness belief. You were taught to treat sleep like an inconvenience, a weakness, a luxury reserved for people who lack ambition. You were taught to measure your worth by your output and your hours awake. You were taught that exhaustion is a badge of honor, proof that you are working hard enough, sacrificing enough, deserving enough. But this belief is a lie that drains you of your life. It convinces you that running on empty is a virtue, that rest is indulgent, that your body should be ignored until it breaks. And all the while, it erodes the very capacity you rely on to create, to love, to think clearly, to be yourself. Sleep is not laziness. Sleep is the engine of everything you do. And the more you treat it like an obstacle, the more you trade your potential for the hollow performance of productivity. Look around at the culture that glorifies being tired. We praise the person who stays at the office until midnight, the student who studies until dawn, the entrepreneur who brags about working 20-hour days. We romanticize the sleepless grind because it looks like dedication. But look closer, and you will see that behind every story of relentless hustle is a hidden cost. Creativity that dims, health that deteriorates, relationships that fracture under the weight of chronic depletion. You can't pour from an empty cup, but you can pretend for a while that you can. And in that pretense, you forget that your body is not a machine you can override with sheer willpower. Exhaustion is not nobility. It is a slow self-erasure. It dulls your senses, clouds your judgment, and robs you of the presence that makes life worth living. It convinces you to keep pushing past your limits until you wake up one day and realize you don't recognize yourself. You are irritable, uninspired, unable to feel joy or curiosity or connection. You think you need to work harder to get those things back, but what you really need is sleep. Not stolen hours here and there, but real, consistent, unapologetic rest. The kind that allows your nervous system to recalibrate, your cells to repair, your mind to process and integrate everything you've been carrying. Consider what happens when you deprive yourself of sleep. Your body floods with stress hormones. Your immune system falters. Your memory and focus degrade. Your emotional resilience collapses. You become reactive, anxious, brittle. You forget things. You lose perspective. You say yes to things you don't mean because you are too tired to resist. Over time, sleep deprivation reshapes your brain in ways that make it harder to feel hope, to solve problems, to connect with other people. You start to believe you are failing because you aren't strong enough, when in truth you are simply starved for the most basic resource your body requires. We don't talk about this because the myth of sleep as laziness is profitable. It keeps you consuming caffeine, signing up for productivity courses, buying planners and apps to squeeze more output from your dwindling reserves. It keeps you chasing an unattainable ideal of perpetual motion. And if you collapse from exhaustion, the system shrugs, another casualty of ambition. You are expected to blame yourself for not being tough enough, rather than questioning why you were ever told that being tough means refusing your own needs. Imagine a child who is learning to walk. When they fall, you don't shame them for needing to rest. You don't call them weak for getting tired. You don't measure their worth by how long they can stay upright without wobbling. You understand that growth requires rest, that learning requires recovery, that effort requires replenishment. Somewhere along the way, you forgot that these truths still apply to you. You convinced yourself that maturity means denying your body's signals, overriding your fatigue with discipline, punishing yourself for being human. But your biology doesn't care about your beliefs. You can call sleep lazy all you want, but your body will still insist on it. When you deprive yourself long enough, it will take what it needs by force, through illness, through burnout, through the collapse of your mental health. You might call that weakness, but it's really just truth reclaiming its place. Rest is not optional. It is not negotiable. It is the foundation on which everything else is built. If you want to create, to love, to grow, to heal, you must learn to honor sleep as the sacred act that it is. You must stop treating it like a failure of willpower and start recognizing it as an act of devotion to your future, to your work, to the people you care about, to your own potential. Sleep is where your mind repairs the micro tears of daily stress, where your memories consolidate, where your dreams sort through what matters and what doesn't. Sleep is where your body heals itself, where your emotions recalibrate, where your spirit returns to a place beyond striving. You don't have to earn your right to rest by proving you've worked hard enough. You don't have to justify your fatigue by listing your accomplishments. You don't have to apologize for needing to sleep. You only have to remember that you are not a machine. You are a living being, and your worth is not measured by how much you can endure before you collapse. Imagine what your life could be if you stopped glorifying exhaustion. Imagine if you trusted that rest would make you stronger, not weaker. Imagine if you believed that sleeping deeply and fully was not an act of laziness, but an act of respect for your body, for your mind, for the one precious life you were given. You will never find fulfillment in a life that requires you to abandon yourself. You will never feel truly alive if you are constantly at war with your own biology. So let the myth die. Let the idea that sleep is a flaw fall away. Let yourself be a creature who needs rest, who deserves rest, who is better in every way when they are rested. Sleep is not a betrayal of your ambition. It is the soil in which your ambition can take root without destroying you. It is the birthplace of your best ideas, your deepest insights, your truest resilience. Sleep is not weakness. Sleep is your birthright. And every time you honor it, you reclaim a piece of yourself that the culture tried to take away. The visibility equals value myth. You have been taught to equate being visible with being worthy. You have been told that if your work is not praised, if your face is not recognized, if your voice is not amplified, then you have failed to matter. But this is a myth so pervasive, it has become almost invisible itself. The visibility equals value myth is a lie that trades your inherent worth for fleeting approval. It makes you believe that unless someone is watching, your existence has no consequence. But think of the most powerful forces in the universe: gravity, time, oxygen. You cannot see them, yet they are the silent architects of reality. Gravity holds the planets in orbit. Time ages every star and softens every stone. Oxygen sustains every breath you have ever taken. These forces do not need your recognition to prove they are real. They simply are. And in the same way, the worth of your life is not measured by how many eyes are upon you. It is measured by the quiet impact you may never witness. You do not see the roots when you admire a tree. You do not see the hidden currents that shape the ocean. And you do not see the unseen struggles that forged your resilience. But the world would be smaller without them. Visibility is seductive because it feels like evidence. When you are acknowledged, you feel undeniable. When you are ignored, you feel erased. But attention is fickle. It is a currency traded on novelty, not truth. The same crowd that applauds you today will forget you tomorrow, not because you became worthless, but because their gaze was never yours to control. If you build your worth on being seen, you will spend your life performing. You will contort yourself to fit expectations, polishing your surface until your depths are neglected. And still, it will never be enough. Because visibility is not designed to satisfy. It is designed to consume. It will take every piece of you you're willing to sacrifice and demand more. This is why people who seem adored often feel hollow. They are loved for their reflection, not their reality. Their value is conditional on staying visible, staying relevant, staying pleasing, but the most lasting contributions are often invisible. A teacher who changes the trajectory of a student's life but never receives a thank you. A scientist whose quiet observations seed discoveries decades later. A parent whose patient love becomes the foundation for a child's strength. These moments do not go viral. They do not trend. But they are real in a way that fame can never imitate. Visibility is an accident of timing and context. You may work for years in darkness, building something only you can see. That does not make your work less valuable. It makes it yours. When you detach your worth from being seen, you find a freedom that cannot be stolen. You can create because creation itself is an act of meaning. You can care because care itself reshapes the world in ways no spotlight will ever reveal. You can rest without the need to prove you have earned it. This is not an argument against sharing your gifts. Let your voice be heard if it serves truth. Let your face be seen if it inspires courage. But do not confuse recognition with validation. One is an echo. The other is an origin. You are the origin. You are the source of your value, whether or not it is acknowledged. Think of the seeds that fall in a forest where no human eye will ever notice. They sprout, grow, and one day become shelter for 1,000 unseen lives. Their existence is no less miraculous because it happens beyond the edge of visibility. Your worth is the same. It exists whether or not someone claps for you. It grows whether or not someone records it. And it endures long after the audience moves on. When you begin to understand this, you reclaim parts of yourself that were lost to the hunger for attention. You stop measuring your days by likes or shares. You start asking deeper questions. What matters when no one is watching? Who am I when I am alone? What do I believe in enough to keep doing, even if it never makes me visible? These questions are uncomfortable because they strip away the illusion that visibility equals value. But they also point you back to something unbreakable, a sense of self that does not flicker with the opinions of others, a sense of purpose that does not wither in the shadows. When you stand in that place, you will see the truth. The most powerful things are invisible. The most meaningful acts are often unrecorded. And the most valuable life is the one you live fully, whether or not the world ever notices. The struggle builds character lie. You were taught that pain is noble, that if you suffer long enough, it will purify you, elevate you, make you worthy. This is the struggle builds character lie, a story that promises every wound will transform into wisdom if you just endure it without complaint. But reality is not so generous. Sometimes pain does not make you stronger. Sometimes it just makes you numb. Sometimes it hollows you out until there is nothing left but a brittle shell that calls itself resilient because it cannot feel anything at all. Consider the generations who survived wars, famines, and dislocation. They were praised for their stoicism, their refusal to yield to despair. But behind the admiration was a silence about what it cost them to endure. The men who returned from the trenches of the First World War did not all emerge wiser or more compassionate. Many came back shattered, haunted by memories they could never share. They built lives around avoidance. They taught their children to suppress emotion, because to feel too much was to risk breaking again. Think about how often you hear that adversity reveals character. That hardship is always an opportunity for growth. But not all struggle refines you. Some struggle corrodes your trust, distorts your sense of self, or teaches you to expect disappointment as the natural order of things. A child who grows up in a household of chaos and neglect does not automatically become resilient. More often, they become hypervigilant, convinced love is conditional and safety is an illusion. In the workplace, this myth shows up as the cult of overwork. You're told that grinding yourself to the edge of collapse proves your dedication. That exhaustion is a badge of honor, but constant strain does not expand your capacity forever. It shrinks it. It burns through the reserves you need to think clearly, to care deeply, to imagine something better. When your nervous system is stuck in survival mode, you are not building character. You are slowly abandoning it. History is littered with examples of how the struggle builds character lie has been used to justify cruelty. During the Industrial Revolution, factory owners argued that long hours and harsh conditions were necessary disciplines, shaping workers into more moral citizens. Colonial administrations claimed that forced labor would uplift indigenous populations. Even now, prisons are defended as places where deprivation and humiliation will somehow inspire transformation. But suffering imposed without dignity rarely creates wisdom. It breeds resentment, shame, and despair. You can see the same logic in personal relationships. When someone hurts you and says it will make you stronger, what they often mean is that your pain is more convenient than their accountability, that if you can just find meaning in the harm, they don't have to change. This is how the myth protects abusers and systems of exploitation. It turns your endurance into their permission. It's true that struggle can be a catalyst. Some people emerge from grief with a deeper appreciation for life. Some find purpose after failure. But the transformation is never automatic. It requires support, reflection, and the chance to integrate what happened. Without those things, suffering often calcifies into bitterness or self-contempt. Ask yourself, who benefits when you believe that every hardship is a blessing in disguise? Who profits when you stay silent about what hurts you because you've been told it's building your character? When you internalize this lie, you become less likely to set boundaries, less likely to seek help, less likely to imagine that you deserve anything gentler. Consider the concept of post-traumatic growth. Researchers have documented how some people experience profound shifts after crisis. More gratitude, more empathy, more resilience. But those same studies also show that many do not. They are left with symptoms that never fully resolve. This doesn't mean they are weak. It means suffering is not a uniform teacher. It means pain alone is not virtue. What would happen if you stopped romanticizing struggle? If you stopped insisting that every scar is a lesson? You might finally grieve what was lost. You might feel the anger you were never allowed to express. You might learn that your worth does not require proof through endurance. Imagine a world where character is measured not by how much you can withstand, but by how willing you are to heal, where growth is not an obligation imposed by trauma, but a possibility supported by compassion, where resilience is not about numbing yourself to survive, but about staying connected to your own humanity, even when it hurts. You do not have to be grateful for every hardship. You do not have to pretend every wound was necessary. Some pain has no purpose. Some struggle leaves no gift. And admitting that is not weakness. It is honesty. In the end, your value is not determined by how much you have suffered. Your capacity for love, curiosity, and joy does not depend on how much you can endure. You are not obligated to find meaning in every injury. You are allowed to simply wish it hadn't happened. And in that wish, in that refusal to sanctify your suffering, you may finally begin to heal. The progress is linear illusion. You were taught to believe that progress is a straight line, that healing unfolds in predictable stages, that success is a steady climb, that life itself is a smooth trajectory from confusion to clarity. You were told that if you just worked hard enough, planned carefully enough, you would graduate from struggle into a permanent state of resolution. But life does not honor these tidy expectations, because real growth never moves in straight lines. It loops and spirals and collapses and starts over. It defies your timelines, resists your metrics, and refuses to be domesticated by your desire for control. Imagine a person who decides to heal from a wound they carried for years. They read the books, they go to therapy, they start to feel lighter. Then, one day, without warning, the old pain returns. The grief swells in their chest as if nothing has changed. They panic, believing they have failed. They think all their progress was an illusion because it did not protect them from feeling bad again. But this is how healing truly works. It is not an upward march. It is a cyclical process. You revisit the same places with new awareness each time. What looks like regression is often integration. What feels like failure is often a deeper layer of resolution emerging. Success follows the same unpredictable rhythm. You work tirelessly to build something, and just when you think you have arrived, you lose your footing. An unexpected challenge appears. A crisis interrupts your momentum. You feel ashamed, as if your worth is measured by whether you can keep climbing without interruption. You look at others and imagine their paths are straight while yours is crooked. But that is an illusion too. Everyone's journey is littered with detours and collapses. The difference is that most people only show you the highlight reel. We are seduced by the fantasy of linear progress because it soothes our anxiety. It tells us that if we do everything right, life will be predictable. But predictability is not how transformation happens. Growth is inherently chaotic. You outgrow old versions of yourself only to circle back and retrieve the parts you abandoned. You make bold strides forward and then retreat in fear. You find clarity, lose it, and find it again in a form you never expected. Think about nature. No tree grows in a perfectly straight line. It bends toward light, yields to storms, loses branches, regenerates. The shape of its growth is defined by its response to the environment, not by some abstract expectation of perfection. Why should your evolution be any different? The belief that progress must always look like improvement is a form of violence you do to yourself. It makes you judge your process harshly. It makes you dismiss the times when you need to pause, reflect, or tend to old wounds. It convinces you that rest is failure, that uncertainty is regression, that anything other than forward motion is proof you are not enough. But what if the moments when you feel lost are the moments when something essential is reorganizing itself inside you? What if the stumbles are not signs you are broken, but evidence you are alive and still learning? Consider the artist who creates prolifically for years, only to enter a long season when nothing comes. In the linear mindset, this would be a crisis, a defeat. But in reality, fallow periods are vital. They allow new ideas to germinate underground. They create space for the old to decompose, so the new can emerge. Creation is cyclical, not linear. Or think about the person who seems to have everything figured out until grief erupts in their life. Suddenly, all their certainties dissolve. They question everything. They feel like they have become a beginner again. But beginners are the ones who are open enough to be transformed. What looks like collapse can be the soil of a more honest life. The linear illusion keeps you trapped in self-criticism. It makes you measure your worth by how consistently you can produce evidence of forward motion. But the truth is, you are allowed to spiral. You are allowed to stutter and regress and begin again. This is not weakness. It is the shape of authentic transformation. When you let go of the myth of the straight path, you can finally honor the intelligence of your own unfolding. You can see that every loop and detour has something to teach you. You can stop punishing yourself for being human. Ask yourself, what would it mean to trust that your life is not behind schedule, even when it feels like you are moving backward? What would it feel like to measure your progress not by speed, but by depth? Not by appearances, but by your willingness to keep showing up. True evolution is not linear. It is a dance with mystery, a surrender to seasons you cannot control, a willingness to let life shape you in ways you did not plan. And when you embrace this, you discover a freedom far greater than certainty, the freedom to belong to your own process without shame. You do not have to prove you are progressing on a straight line. You only have to keep returning to what matters, over and over, in whatever form it appears. This is how real growth happens: imperfect, non-linear, and utterly alive. The clarity brings peace assumption. You spend your life searching for answers. You tell yourself that if you can just understand why things happened, if you can trace every hurt back to its source, you will finally feel free. You believe that clarity is the cure, that the right explanation will lift the weight off your shoulders and leave you standing in a clean, well-lit place where nothing can hurt you anymore. But this is the sweetest, most seductive lie your mind can offer you, because clarity does not always bring peace. Sometimes, clarity shatters the illusions that kept you functioning. Sometimes, the truths you uncover don't heal you. They break you open. Think about the moments you finally realized someone you loved was never going to love you back the way you needed. For months or years, you clung to confusion. You replayed conversations looking for hidden meaning. You convinced yourself that if you could just figure out what went wrong, you could fix it. And when the clarity came, that they were never capable of meeting you where you stood, it didn't soothe you. It demolished the hope that had kept you going. It left you with nothing to cling to but the raw ache of acceptance. Or consider the person who spends years searching for the root of their sadness. They read books, sit in therapy, dissect every memory. They believe that if they can identify the exact moment they began to feel unworthy, they will stop feeling unworthy. But when they find it, a parent's rejection, a moment of betrayal, a childhood spent unseen, it doesn't erase the pain. It only confirms how deep the wound goes. Clarity illuminates the darkness, but illumination is not the same as relief. Sometimes, the light is too bright to bear. This assumption, that knowing is the same as healing, is comforting because it gives you the illusion of control. If you can name the thing that hurt you, you believe you can conquer it. But life doesn't work that way. You can know exactly why you are afraid of intimacy and still tremble when someone gets close. You can understand the roots of your self-sabotage and still find yourself repeating the same patterns. Awareness is not an antidote. Sometimes, it is simply a mirror that shows you just how tangled you have become. Think about how often you chase answers to avoid feeling helpless. You believe that confusion is the enemy, that uncertainty is the problem to be solved. But uncertainty is a part of being alive. Not everything can be resolved into a neat story. Not every question has an answer that makes the pain go away. When you believe that clarity must bring peace, you set yourself up for disappointment, because sometimes the most honest answers only reveal how little power you have over other people, over the past, over the way your heart responds to loss. Imagine someone who discovers the real reason they were abandoned. For years, they blamed themselves. They thought if they had been smarter, more attractive, more agreeable, they would have been loved. And then they learn the truth. The other person was never capable of real commitment. That clarity is a gift, yes. It frees them from self-blame, but it also forces them to grieve all over again, to confront the fact that no amount of effort could have changed the outcome. In that moment, clarity feels like salt poured into an old wound. There is a difference between understanding and integration. Understanding happens in the mind. It is a cognitive process, a way of fitting pieces together so the picture makes sense. Integration happens in the body, in the heart. It is slower, stranger, and often much more painful. It requires you to feel everything you tried to outthink, to sit in the grief, the disappointment, the loneliness without flinching away. Only then does clarity start to transform you. Not because it erases what you feel, but because it teaches you how to hold it without collapsing. This is why some people spend their lives chasing explanations without ever finding peace. They think the next insight will be the one that finally sets them free. But insight is not liberation unless you allow yourself to feel the impact of what you've learned. It is easier to collect knowledge than to surrender to grief. It is easier to analyze the problem than to weep for what you lost. Sometimes, clarity demands that you dismantle the stories that kept you safe. The story that your family was fine. The story that your relationship was worth the suffering. The story that you were to blame for your own pain because blaming yourself felt more manageable than facing the randomness and cruelty of the world. When those stories fall apart, there is no immediate peace, only the terrifying openness of reality without a script. But here is the paradox. Though clarity can break you, it can also create the conditions for something truer. When you stop expecting understanding to deliver instant relief, you make space for a different kind of peace. A peace that isn't dependent on everything making sense. A peace that comes from knowing you can survive, not knowing. You can survive the ache of truth without having to fix it. Think of the person who stops asking why their parent couldn't love them, who stops believing that if they could just figure out the cause, they could change the past. In that surrender, there is grief, but also a quiet freedom. The freedom to stop fighting reality. The freedom to let go of the fantasy that the right answer will finally make them feel whole. This is what it means to grow up. To accept that some questions will never yield satisfying explanations. To learn that sometimes clarity hurts more than confusion. And to trust that you don't need every answer to heal. You only need the willingness to feel what is already there. So, next time you find yourself chasing clarity, pause. Ask yourself what you hope it will give you. Ask whether you are seeking truth or trying to avoid the vulnerability of uncertainty. Remember that clarity is not an endpoint. It is the beginning of a new kind of relationship with yourself. One where you can hold the raw facts of your life without demanding that they stop hurting. You are allowed to know and still grieve. You are allowed to understand and still feel lost. You are allowed to let clarity be the beginning, not the solution. Because peace does not always arrive when you find the answer. Sometimes, peace is what you discover when you stop expecting the answer to save you. The memory equals reality bias. You trust your memories like they are a ledger of truth, an unbroken record of what happened, when, and how. You replay them when you need to prove a point or confirm your own history. You think, if I remember it this vividly, it must be real. But what if that certainty is just another illusion your mind weaves to keep you feeling stable? What if your memory is not an archive of reality, but an ever-shifting collage of fragments stitched together by feeling, bias, and the urgent need to make sense of chaos? Memory is not a camera. It does not record objectively. It reconstructs. Each time you remember an event, you are not playing back a film. You are rewriting a story. You pull scraps of sensory detail and emotion from different corners of your brain. You fill in gaps with assumptions, guesses, and wishes. The memory feels whole, but it is built from pieces that don't always belong together. And the more often you revisit it, the more it drifts. Consider the first time you felt heartbreak. In your recollection, you might remember the exact words they said, the look in their eyes, the moment you knew it was over. But your brain does not store every detail. It saves impressions. It saves the heat in your chest, the ache in your stomach, the sudden dizziness. The words you remember are a blend of what was actually spoken and what your mind decided you must have heard. You believe this reconstruction because it feels complete. You trust it because it feels vivid. But feeling vivid is not the same as being true. This is why eyewitness testimony is so unreliable. Two people can stand shoulder to shoulder in the same place and remember the event in ways that contradict each other completely. Their brains filter the experience through different expectations, beliefs, and fears. Each walks away convinced their version is fact. Each is certain the other is mistaken. And neither is lying. They are simply tethered to the story their minds stitched together. Memory is shaped by survival. Your brain prioritizes what it thinks will keep you safe. If you experience something traumatic, your recall may exaggerate the danger to keep you vigilant. If you felt powerless, your mind may focus on details that prove you couldn't have changed the outcome. These distortions are not moral failings. They are adaptations. They help you form a narrative about who you are and how you got here. But they are not evidence of objective reality. Even the memories you cherish are colored by bias. Nostalgia edits out discomfort. Regret magnifies your mistakes. Pride embellishes your victories. You might remember a childhood holiday as perfect because you need it to be a refuge from everything that came later. You might recall a fight as more vicious than it was because it justifies the walls you built afterward. You might replay an old triumph and leave out every insecurity that haunted you at the time. You do this without realizing it, and then you swear that the version you carry is the truth. It is unsettling to think you can't trust your own mind. We want to believe that memory is reliable because it anchors our identity. If you can't be sure of your memories, how can you be sure of who you are? But the beauty of this realization is that it frees you. If memory is not absolute, you don't have to be imprisoned by your interpretations. You can hold your memories with a lighter grip, understanding they are stories. Stories you needed to survive. Stories that served a purpose, but not stories that are beyond question. Imagine someone who has spent years believing they were rejected because they were unworthy. They have replayed the memory of a single conversation over and over, each time reinforcing their shame. But what if that memory is only one angle on what happened? What if it was never about their worth? What if they reconstructed the scene to explain the pain in a way that made sense? Or think of the times you were sure you knew what someone meant by what they said. You remember the tone, the expression, the context. You swear it was clear, but your memory recorded more of your emotion than their intention. You are replaying the moment through the lens of everything you felt about them, about yourself, about what you feared was true. And every time you recall it, you reinforce a story that may have very little to do with what actually happened. This doesn't mean you must discard every memory. It means you can approach your memories with curiosity instead of certainty. You can ask, what might I be leaving out? What might I be adding? What need is this memory fulfilling for me? When you loosen your grip on the idea that memory equals reality, you open space for compassion. Compassion for yourself, for all the ways you tried to protect yourself with stories. Compassion for others, for the ways their memories, too, are shaped by fear and hope and longing. You can also become more aware of how your memories change over time. The version you recall today may not be the version you remember tomorrow, and that's okay. You are not betraying yourself by evolving your understanding of the past. You are simply acknowledging that your mind is alive, constantly editing, reshaping, and revising as you grow. This is why healing often requires re-examining the memories you thought were settled. Not because you must prove them false, but because you can find new meaning in them. You can choose to release the parts that no longer serve you. You can forgive where you once blamed. You can soften where you once hardened. You can see yourself not only as the person who was hurt, but also as the person who survived. Memory is a mirror that sometimes reflects and sometimes distorts. It is not the same as reality, and it never was. And when you understand that, you gain the freedom to tell yourself a story that is more honest, more nuanced, and more compassionate. A story that does not trap you in the past, but helps you step more fully into the present. The majority equals truth rule. You have been taught to measure truth by counting heads. You were told that if enough people agree, their belief becomes reality. But this is the majority equals truth rule, and it is a comforting deception. Consensus feels safe because it relieves you of the burden to question. If everyone believes, then you don't have to think. You don't have to risk standing alone. But truth is not created by popularity. It exists independent of your approval or your fear. Consider how many times in history the majority was not just mistaken, but catastrophically wrong. There was a time when most people believed the earth was flat, and to disagree was to invite ridicule, or worse. There was a time when most believed that some humans were less valuable than others, and this belief justified atrocities. The consensus was not wisdom. It was cowardice reinforced by repetition. The majority clung to their illusions because questioning them was dangerous, and so a lie became law. This is the pattern. When enough voices echo the same idea, it becomes a fortress. It does not matter if the idea is true. It matters only that it is repeated until no one dares to challenge it. The majority often worships certainty because certainty feels like safety. But real truth is rarely comfortable. It is a disruption. It is a question that shatters your assumptions. If you look closely, you will see that consensus is often born from fear. Fear of isolation. Fear of being wrong. Fear of losing status or belonging. When you accept the majority's beliefs without scrutiny, you surrender your own perception. You trade your curiosity for acceptance. You trade your integrity for applause. And you build a life on a foundation that may not be real. Consider the times you knew in your gut that something was false, but you stayed silent because everyone else agreed. You felt the dissonance, the quiet voice that said, "This doesn't add up." But the pressure to conform was louder. And so, you swallowed your questions. You pretended to believe. You told yourself it was easier that way. But each time you do this, you train yourself to abandon your own discernment. You become dependent on consensus to tell you what is real, and in that dependency, you lose something essential: the courage to think alone. The most important breakthroughs in science, art, and human rights did not begin with consensus. They began with a lone voice that refused to be silenced by the crowd. Galileo stood against the entire establishment of his time because he trusted evidence over consensus. Abolitionists defied a majority who believed slavery was acceptable. Reformers challenged laws everyone else called just. Their truth was not validated by the number of people who agreed. It was validated by reality itself. If you want to find what is true, you must be willing to stand in the empty space where no one claps for you. You must tolerate the discomfort of being the only one who sees what you see. This is not an easy path. Humans are wired to belong. In our ancient past, being cast out of the tribe meant death. That instinct still lives in you. It whispers that disagreement is dangerous, that doubt is betrayal, but you are not in the wilderness anymore. You will not die because you refuse to echo the majority. You may feel afraid, but that fear is not proof that you are wrong. It is only proof that you are human. If you look honestly, you will see that consensus often grows from the soil of inertia. People believe what is easiest to believe. They inherit opinions without investigation. They mistake familiarity for evidence, and they call this laziness truth. But truth does not care how many people chant its name. It does not need your agreement to exist. It waits for you to discover it, unafraid of your skepticism. If you want to live with integrity, you must learn to hold your own counsel, to ask, is this true because it is real or because it is repeated? You must be willing to test ideas against evidence, not popularity. You must be willing to accept that sometimes the crowd is wrong, and you will have to stand without them. This is not an argument for arrogance or isolation. You can listen to others, you can learn from them, but you must never outsource your perception. You must never confuse the volume of a chorus with the accuracy of its song. When you stop measuring truth by consensus, you reclaim your sovereignty. You discover that certainty is often an illusion shared by many, and wisdom begins the moment you choose to see for yourself. The reflection is identity error. You grow up believing that other people's reactions are reliable evidence of who you are, that if they admire you, you are admirable. If they dismiss you, you are insignificant. This is the reflection is identity error, a subtle distortion that convinces you your value is whatever bounces back from someone else's gaze. But most people do not see you as you are. They see a projection of their own expectations, wounds, and fears. And when you build your identity out of those reflections, you become a stranger to yourself. Consider the way children learn to understand themselves. A child who is met with warmth and encouragement begins to feel inherently worthy. Another child, met with constant criticism or neglect, learns to associate their existence with defect. But the child doesn't have the perspective to realize that their parents' reactions are shaped by stress, by trauma, by unhealed stories that have nothing to do with them. So the child internalizes those distorted reflections as truth. As you grow older, this pattern continues. You enter a classroom or a workplace and adjust yourself to fit what you think others will approve. You learn to smile when you're uneasy, to hide your uncertainty, to perform confidence, because you sense that vulnerability makes people uncomfortable. When you succeed, you feel worthy. When you fail or are criticized, you feel exposed and hollow. You believe every reaction confirms something essential about you. Think about the person who tries to please everyone. They spend their energy reading the room, anticipating needs, softening their edges so they don't provoke disapproval. On the surface, they seem kind and flexible, but inside, they often feel invisible because they have learned to exist as a mirror, reflecting back what others want to see. And over time, they forget what their own face looks like. Even in love, the reflection is identity. Error is pervasive. You fall for someone who seems to adore you, and you bloom in their attention. But what you are often experiencing is not unconditional recognition. It's the thrill of being cast in their fantasy. When the fantasy collapses, when they begin to see your complexity, you may feel you have failed them. But the truth is simpler. They were never seeing you completely. They were seeing the part of you that fit their story. History is full of examples of how projections can define identity. Entire groups have been labeled inferior, dangerous, or unworthy, not because of anything intrinsic, but because dominant cultures needed an other to fear or despise. When propaganda paints a people as enemies, Those targeted often begin to internalize the shame, believing they must deserve the contempt. This is not evidence of truth. It is evidence of how power manipulates perception. Consider how social media amplifies this distortion. Every post becomes an invitation for judgment. Every like or comment a signal of your importance. The algorithms reward performance over authenticity, and slowly, you begin to measure your worth by metrics that have nothing to do with your real character. You curate yourself into a brand, hoping to be validated, but no amount of applause will ever feel secure because it is always conditional. Ask yourself, how often do you confuse someone's reaction for reality? How many times have you abandoned your own instincts because someone else disapproved? How much of your personality is an adaptation to other people's projections? This error is so persuasive because it offers a shortcut to belonging. If you can just reflect what others want, you will be accepted. But acceptance bought through self-erasure is brittle. It cannot sustain you when circumstances change. It cannot comfort you when the applause stops. What would happen if you stopped mistaking reflection for identity? If you began to trust that your worth exists independently of how others respond, you might disappoint people, you might lose approval, but you would also begin to reclaim something precious, the freedom to be whole, even when you are misunderstood. It doesn't mean you ignore feedback. Sometimes others see things you cannot. But discernment means learning to separate useful insight from projection. It means asking, is this about me or is this about them? Is their reaction evidence of my character or a mirror of their own unresolved story? When you stop outsourcing your self-definition, you begin to notice how much projection shapes human relationships. The colleague who resents your confidence may be wrestling with their own insecurity. The partner who accuses you of coldness may be terrified of intimacy themselves. The stranger who dismisses you may be protecting their own fragile ego. The reflection is identity. Error is powerful because it's reinforced everywhere, but you are allowed to step outside it. You are allowed to define yourself by the quiet knowing that lives beneath performance. You are allowed to be a person, not a mirror, because your worth is not a consensus. It is not a vote. It is not something that needs constant confirmation. It is the part of you that remains when every reflection shatters, the part that is whole whether anyone sees it or not. The repetition equals sign, truth condition. You hear something enough times, and you start to believe it, even if you never questioned it, even if your instincts recoiled at first. The mind begins to surrender to familiarity. Repetition is a subtle seduction. It does not demand your agreement outright. It only requires your exposure. Over time, what was once absurd begins to feel plausible. What was once clearly false starts to feel safe simply because you have heard it again and again. This is how lies become truths, not by the force of their logic, but by the persistence of their echo. You may think you are immune. You may think your intelligence protects you from such manipulation. But the mind is wired to conserve energy, to prefer what feels familiar over what feels uncertain. Familiarity is mistaken for accuracy because it reduces the discomfort of ambiguity. Imagine you hear a claim about yourself, maybe that you are not enough, that you will never change, that your worth is conditional. The first time you hear it, you feel the injustice. But over time, as the message repeats in different forms, a careless comment, an offhand criticism, a look of disappointment, it burrows deeper into you. Eventually, it stops feeling like an opinion. It becomes an assumption you carry everywhere. You no longer remember when you started believing it. You only know it feels true. This is the repetition equals truth condition. It operates quietly, beneath your awareness. It shows up in propaganda, advertising, cultural narratives. It is why slogans work, why rumors persist, why conspiracy theories flourish. They do not need to be logical. They only need to be relentless. Every repetition is a rehearsal for belief. Consider how often you repeat certain stories about yourself. I'm too sensitive. I'm too late. I'm not talented enough. Each time you say these things, even in passing, you are reinforcing the neural pathways that make them feel inevitable. The more you rehearse the story, the more your mind streamlines it. What began as a fleeting thought becomes a fixed identity. The danger is not just in the stories you inherit, but in the ones you tell yourself over and over. When you are not vigilant, you become the primary author of your own limitation. You mistake the comfort of the known for the legitimacy of the truth. You stop questioning whether your beliefs are accurate simply because they have been repeated so many times. Think about the narrative society repeats, that success must look a certain way, that beauty is measured by narrow standards, that strength requires you to suppress your emotions. None of these ideas are objective truths. They are cultural constructs rehearsed until they feel self-evident. And because everyone else seems to agree, you assume they must be right. But consensus is not the same as accuracy. A lie told in unison is still a lie. You must learn to recognize when repetition is masquerading as truth. You must learn to pause and ask, do I believe this because I have examined it, or because it has been drilled into me? Do I trust this idea because it resonates with my values, or because it feels familiar? Familiarity is not evidence. It is only exposure repeated until you confuse recognition with legitimacy. This is why it is so difficult to unlearn certain beliefs. Your nervous system interprets the unknown as a threat. Even when the old story is harmful, it feels safer than the uncertainty of rewriting it. So, you stay loyal to the narrative that imprisons you, because at least it is predictable. But comfort is not proof of truth. When you realize how easily the mind can be conditioned by repetition, you become more compassionate with yourself. You understand that belief is not always a conscious choice. Sometimes it is a reflex, a pattern, a groove worn deep by time and exposure. But you also reclaim your responsibility to question those grooves. Ask yourself, what would you believe about yourself if you had never been told otherwise? What would you trust if you had not been trained to doubt your own knowing? Who might you become if you stopped repeating the stories that keep you small? Repetition is a powerful teacher, but it is not always a wise one. You have the power to interrupt the echo. You have the choice to replace the old refrain with something truer, even if it feels unfamiliar. The first time you speak a new truth, it will feel awkward. The second time, uncertain. But over time, your repetition will become your liberation. The mind will eventually believe whatever you feed it consistently. So, feed it with clarity, not just familiarity. Feed it with values, not just consensus. Feed it with truths you have tested, not just slogans you have absorbed. You are not doomed to believe everything you hear. You can choose to question, to unlearn, to reauthor the story. You can decide that just because something has been repeated does not mean it deserves your allegiance. Remember, the echo is not evidence. The chorus is not proof. The safety of the familiar is not the same as the solidity of the true. You have the power to break the cycle. You have the right to decide what you will believe next. The clarity ends, confusion trap. You spend so much of your life craving clarity. You think of it as a cure for confusion, a final, reassuring answer that will shut every door of doubt. You imagine that if you can just find the right insight, everything will fall into place, and you'll never have to feel uncertain again. But clarity doesn't always end confusion. Sometimes it expands it, because real clarity doesn't just deliver a clean solution. Real clarity often demands you tear down the old frameworks that made you feel safe. We love to tell ourselves that confusion is the enemy, that it's a problem to be solved, a fog to be lifted. But confusion is not always a sign that you don't know enough. Sometimes it's the first honest evidence that what you knew wasn't true. Sometimes confusion is the mind's desperate attempt to reconcile reality with the old stories you've outgrown. Think about the moment you first began to see your family clearly, not as the perfect or terrible people you believed them to be, but as flawed humans carrying their own unspoken wounds. For a moment, you thought that recognition would soothe you, that it would explain everything. But it didn't end the confusion. It multiplied it. You began to wonder how many other beliefs you'd inherited without question. You began to doubt your memories, your loyalties, the simple narratives you'd been telling yourself about who you are and where you came from. Or think of the person who finally recognizes that their career, once a source of pride, has become a prison. For years, they believed that success would quiet their self-doubt. They clung to the idea that if they achieved enough, they'd stop feeling hollow. But when clarity comes, it doesn't bring relief. It shatters the identity they built around achievement. It leaves them staring at a vast landscape of uncertainty with no map to guide them. This is why clarity is so often mistaken for confusion, because it requires you to step outside the neat categories that once organized your world. It asks you to look at the truth without flinching, to admit that you don't know what happens next, that the life you built on half-truths will not survive this revelation in its current form. Imagine you've spent years convincing yourself that love means sacrifice. You believed that tolerating neglect or cruelty proved your devotion. And then slowly, You begin to see the truth. Love that demands you shrink yourself isn't love at all. That clarity is a gift, but it doesn't end your confusion. It amplifies it. Because if you were wrong about love, what else were you wrong about? If this story was a lie, how many others are waiting to be uncovered? We are conditioned to believe that clarity is tidy, that it comes with a sense of closure, but the opposite is often true. Clarity dismantles illusions you didn't even realize were illusions. It forces you to confront the space they leave behind, a space where certainty used to live, now occupied only by questions. This is why people sometimes run back to their confusion, why they pretend not to see what they already know, because staying confused feels safer than acknowledging that clarity will require them to change, to leave, to let go, to rebuild. Think of the person who suspects their relationship is over. Deep down, they know it. The clarity has already arrived, quietly, insistently. But they keep asking for advice. They keep spinning in circles of analysis. Because as long as they are confused, they don't have to act. They don't have to grieve. They don't have to face the empty space on the other side of ending. Clarity doesn't always feel like a revelation. Sometimes it feels like loss. Sometimes it feels like everything you trusted has collapsed under its own weight. Sometimes it feels like the death of a version of you that was never meant to last. And yet, this is what real clarity demands. The courage to look at your life without the filter of old expectations. The willingness to say, I don't know where this leaves me. The humility to admit that you will have to build something new with no guarantee it will feel safer than what you left behind. Clarity is not the final step. It is the threshold. It is the place where your illusions fall away and you meet yourself in raw, unmediated truth. This is why clarity often feels worse before it feels better. Because before it frees you, it empties you out. When you expect clarity to end your confusion, you set yourself up for disappointment. Because the truth is, clarity often introduces more complexity, not less. It requires you to question everything you thought you settled. It demands you consider that certainty was never your ally. It was a disguise you wore to feel less afraid. Real clarity doesn't soothe your mind immediately. It unsettles it. It breaks the comfortable narratives you relied on to avoid change. It shows you how much you don't know, and how much you will never know. But in that dismantling, something essential happens. You become honest. You become humble. You become open to transformation. Consider the person who finally admits they don't love their career, their city, their relationship. For a while they are lost. Confusion rushes in to fill the void left by clarity. But eventually they begin to see that confusion is not failure. It is the first sign of freedom. It is the invitation to rebuild without the burden of pretending. This is why the clarity ends. Confusion trap is so pervasive. Because it tells you that if you can just find the right answer, you can avoid the discomfort of growth. But growth and clarity are inseparable. And growth always demands you walk through the wilderness of not knowing. So, if you are in that wilderness now, if you have glimpsed a truth that makes you question everything, know this. You are exactly where you need to be. The confusion you feel is not a step backward. It is the necessary unraveling that makes space for something more real. You are allowed to be disoriented. You are allowed to grieve the old frameworks that no longer hold. You are allowed to take your time, because clarity is not an ending. It is a beginning. And beginnings are always messy. Next time you feel the urge to chase clarity as an escape hatch, pause. Ask yourself whether you are willing to let clarity do its real work, to break you open, to challenge you, to lead you somewhere unfamiliar. You don't have to pretend you are sure. You don't have to pretend you are ready. You only have to be willing to follow the truth wherever it leads, even if it leaves you more confused than before. Because in the end, it is better to stand in honest uncertainty than to cling to comforting illusions that were never meant to last. The desire equals destiny bias. You think that wanting something is proof you were born to have it. You've been taught to believe that desire is a compass pointing you toward your destiny. The moment you feel the tug of longing, you assume it must be evidence of purpose, that your soul is whispering some secret truth about who you are and what you deserve. But what if that desire isn't an echo of your destiny at all? What if it's an echo of something else, an unmet need, a wound you never healed, or a story you inherited without ever questioning whether it was yours to begin with? Desire feels holy because it feels urgent. It feels like a flame in the chest, a magnetic pull, a certainty that defies logic. But desire is not always a sign of alignment. Sometimes it's a sign of programming. You live in a culture built to monetize your longing. Every image you see, every slogan you hear, every algorithm you scroll past is designed to plant seeds of wanting in your mind. You are told you must desire more beauty, more wealth, more status, more validation, because your dissatisfaction is profitable. It fuels industries. It feeds systems that depend on you feeling incomplete. Imagine standing in front of a mirror, scrutinizing your reflection. You feel a surge of wanting, to look different, to be more desirable, to prove you are worthy of love. You think this desire comes from within you, but trace it back, and you will find it was planted by 1,000 images, 1,000,000 whispered messages telling you what beauty means and why you are failing to measure up. The desire to change yourself is not evidence of destiny. It's evidence of conditioning. Or consider the person who feels an overwhelming need to achieve some particular success, to be admired, to be envied, to be known. They believe this ambition is sacred, a sign they were meant to stand out. But look deeper, and you may find that desire was born from an old wound, a childhood spent feeling invisible, a fear of being unworthy unless they excelled, an ache for love disguised as a hunger for accomplishment. Desire, in this case, is not destiny. It's a symptom. Even in relationships, desire can be deceptive. You can be drawn to someone with an intensity that feels like fate. You tell yourself this is proof you are meant to be together. But sometimes, what you call love is actually the familiar pull of an old pattern, a reenactment of the dynamics you learned in your earliest attachments. You feel at home in the chaos because chaos is what you knew. You call it destiny because you don't yet see that familiarity is not the same as truth. Desire can also be a distraction, a way to avoid the discomfort of the present moment. You want something new because you believe it will rescue you from your own dissatisfaction. You convince yourself that the next achievement, the next purchase, the next relationship will finally complete you. But this is a trap with no exit. Because when you get the thing you thought you needed, you discover your hunger has simply shifted to another target. Desire, unexamined, becomes an endless loop. This doesn't mean all desire is false. Some desires are clear signals, evidence of your deepest gifts calling you forward. The desire to create, to serve, to express yourself authentically. These longings often come from the part of you that remembers who you are beneath the noise. But the only way to tell the difference is to question your wanting. To ask, where did this come from? What does it promise me? What am I hoping it will fix? When you slow down and look at your desire with curiosity instead of blind trust, you begin to see its true shape. You may find it is layered, complicated, tangled up in memory and fear. You may realize the thing you want is just a stand-in for something deeper, belonging, safety, love. And when you see this clearly, you are free to choose whether you will keep chasing it or look for nourishment in a place that can actually sustain you. Imagine the relief of discovering that you don't have to be enslaved by every impulse that rises in you, that you can feel desire without surrendering to it, that you can honor what is real in your longing and release what is just inherited noise. This is how you find your true path, not by believing every spark of wanting is destiny, but by daring to question where the fire came from in the first place. You become your own compass. You learn to separate the desires that are yours from the desires that were planted in you by people who never cared about your wholeness. You will still want things. You will still feel longing, but you will no longer be controlled by the fantasy that every desire is sacred. You will know that desire is information, not instruction. It is a message, not a command, and you can receive it, study it, and decide for yourself whether it points to your becoming or simply to your old wounds asking for your attention. This is not the easy path. It requires you to be honest about the parts of you that are still afraid, still hungry, still unfinished. But in that honesty, you find something more trustworthy than desire. You find discernment. And with discernment comes the freedom to want wisely, to choose deliberately, and to build a life that reflects your truth, not the illusions you were sold. The anger is destructive myth. You were taught that anger is dangerous, that it must be swallowed, tamed, buried under politeness or prayer. You learned early that to show anger was to risk rejection or punishment. So you turned it inward, coated it with shame, called it a defect in your character. This is the anger is destructive myth, the lie that anger is proof of moral failure instead of evidence of your humanity. Anger is not your enemy. It is the immune system of the soul, the force that erupts when your boundaries are breached, when your dignity is threatened, when your voice is dismissed. Without anger, you would tolerate harm indefinitely. You would mistake self-betrayal for virtue. You would call silence peace, while your spirit withered beneath the weight of unspoken truth. Think about the times you suppressed your anger to keep the peace. You smiled while your heart pounded. You nodded while your stomach twisted. You told yourself you were being mature, compassionate, evolved. But your body kept the score, the tight jaw, the shallow breath, the tension in your neck, all reminders that your rage was still alive, waiting for you to listen. When anger is ignored, it does not evaporate. It ferments. It becomes resentment, bitterness, depression. It starts to leak through your words in sarcasm or contempt. It flares in moments that seem disproportionate because it is carrying the weight of every time you said nothing. This is why suppressed anger often turns into illness. The energy you spend containing it has to go somewhere. It seeps into your cells, compromises your immunity, exhausts your nervous system. Your body tries to metabolize what your mind refuses to face. You cannot heal what you will not name, and you cannot transform anger if you pretend it is always destructive. Anger in its pure form is neither good nor bad. It is a signal, a demand for change, a message that something important has been violated. If you learn to honor that message without letting it control you, anger becomes fuel for courage. It becomes the voice that says, enough, no more pretending, no more shrinking, no more hiding what hurts. But most of us never learned how to be in relationship with anger. We learned to fear it because we saw it expressed in violence or manipulation. We learned to avoid it because we were punished for showing it. And so we internalized the myth that anger is inherently corrosive. But healthy anger does not require destruction. It requires expression. It requires clarity. It requires the willingness to feel discomfort in service of honesty. When you deny your anger, you also deny your clarity. You blur the lines between what is acceptable and what is intolerable. You teach others that your boundaries are negotiable, and you teach yourself that your pain is less important than someone else's comfort. This is not humility. This is self-erasure. To reclaim your anger is to reclaim your wholeness. It is to say, my feelings are valid. My boundaries matter. My voice deserves to be heard. It is to recognize that anger is not a threat to love. It is often a testament to love. You are angry because you care. You are angry because something precious is at stake. You are angry because you refuse to accept what diminishes your spirit. The work is not to banish your anger, but to learn its language. To ask, what is this anger protecting? What truth is it demanding I speak? What action is it asking me to take? When you bring curiosity to your rage, you transform it from a weapon into a teacher. You can set boundaries without cruelty. You can express truth without aggression. You can stand firm without abandoning compassion. But none of this is possible if you keep insisting that anger is a disease. It is not. It is an alarm bell. It is a flare shot into the sky to mark where healing is needed. If you silence it, you will never find your way back to yourself. Imagine how your life would change if you stopped apologizing for your anger. If you stopped filtering your truth to make others comfortable. If you stopped equating your fire with failure, you would become unshakable. You would become honest. You would become free. Because anger is not what breaks you. What breaks you is pretending you have no right to feel it. What breaks you is abandoning yourself to preserve illusions of harmony. The most destructive force is not anger. It is the lie that your anger has no place here. The failure equals shame lie. You have been taught to flinch at failure, to see every misstep as proof that you are inadequate, incompetent, undeserving. This is the failure equals shame lie, a story whispered into you by schools, workplaces, and families that were themselves afraid of appearing flawed. But failure is not disgrace. It is often the only environment where real learning takes root. Shame is simply society's bruise on your instinct to risk. Consider the way children learn to walk. They fall hundreds of times, crashing into tables, scraping their knees, losing balance again and again. No one tells them this means they are defective. No one suggests they stop trying because they haven't mastered it on the first attempt. The falling is understood as necessary, even noble, yet somewhere along the way, that grace disappears. Mistakes stop being seen as steps forward. They start being evidence that you should have known better. Think about how school conditions you to equate grades with worth. One wrong answer and you're labeled careless. One failed test and you're told you're not trying hard enough. But those scores often measure compliance more than curiosity. They teach you to avoid the unknown because the unknown threatens your status. They make you shrink your questions to what you already feel sure you can answer. In the professional world, the same pattern repeats. Employees hide their errors to avoid embarrassment. Organizations punish experimentation when it doesn't pay off immediately. And innovation withers under the weight of fear. People stop taking risks not because they lack ideas, but because they have been convinced that mistakes are irredeemable. Consider the story of Thomas Edison, who conducted thousands of failed experiments before arriving at the right filament for the light bulb. He did not interpret each failed attempt as shameful. He described them as discoveries of what didn't work. But if he had been governed by the same fear of failure that dominates so many institutions, he would have stopped before the breakthrough was possible. History is filled with examples of how failure preceded triumph. The early rockets built by pioneers like Robert Goddard often exploded on the launch pad. His work was ridiculed by the press. He could have given up, internalizing their scorn as proof he was foolish. Instead, he understood that experimentation requires resilience, that no progress happens without risk. But the lie persists because it serves a purpose. When you are afraid to fail, you are easier to control. You become more obedient, more dependent on external validation. You learn to stay within the lines drawn by other people's expectations. You stop asking dangerous questions. You stop challenging systems that benefit from your compliance. Ask yourself, how many opportunities have you abandoned because you couldn't bear the possibility of failing in public? How many times have you judged yourself more harshly than anyone else ever could? This is not humility. It is self-sabotage, disguised as prudence. Failure is not an indictment of your worth. It is a record of your courage to try. It is proof that you were willing to risk comfort for the chance to grow. The shame you feel is not intrinsic. It is learned. It is the echo of every voice that told you mistakes were embarrassing instead of essential. Imagine what your life might look like if you treated failure as neutral data. If you interpreted every setback as information, not identity. You would iterate faster. You would recover more easily. You would stop fearing your own potential. This does not mean you celebrate carelessness. It means you recognize that mastery is built on a foundation of attempts that did not succeed. It means you honor the part of you that is willing to experiment, to be seen trying, to be seen imperfect. Consider how shame shrinks possibility. An artist who is terrified of bad reviews never completes their work. An entrepreneur who dreads bankruptcy never starts. A leader who fears criticism never innovates. In each case, the lie is the same, that failure is evidence of inherent deficiency. But in reality, it is just a moment, just a data point, just an event. When you detach shame from failure, you reclaim the freedom to risk. You grant yourself permission to be human, to learn in real time, to adapt without self-loathing. The next time you fail, notice the reflex to apologize for existing. Notice the impulse to hide. Then ask yourself, who taught you that mistakes diminish you? Whose voice are you still trying to appease? You were not born believing that failure equals shame. You were taught, which means you can unlearn it. You can decide that your worth is not conditional on your record of perfection. You can decide that failure is simply part of the territory of a life lived fully. In the end, the measure of your character is not how few times you fall. It is how honestly you stand back up, how generously you interpret your own efforts, and how bravely you try again. The titles prove identity belief. You have been told your whole life that titles are proof you exist, that your identity is something you earn through achievements, positions, and the labels other people recognize. You learn to collect them like trophies: the job title, the degree, the relationship status, the reputation. Each title feels like a layer of protection against the fear that underneath all the accomplishments, you might not be enough. You believe that if you can just gather enough evidence, enough letters after your name, enough respect from others, enough credentials pinned to your chest, you will finally be real, finally complete. But the truth is, titles are costumes. They decorate you. They do not define you. Imagine you spend decades climbing a ladder in your profession. Every milestone becomes another brick in the wall you build around your sense of self. You start to believe that you are what you do, that without the role, the influence, the status, you would vanish. Then one day, it ends. The career dissolves, or you step away, or the world no longer cares about your title. You wake up and realize the identity you built so carefully has evaporated. In that moment, you confront a terrifying question. Who am I without the labels? If I am not my job, my achievements, my place in the hierarchy, what remains? This is the belief no one warns you about, that you are only as real as the titles you hold, that if the world stops acknowledging your role, you cease to matter. But identity is not a costume you put on in the morning. It is the quiet, enduring essence that remains when all the costumes are stripped away. Think about a tree. You can label it by its species, its age, its location. You can measure its height and its yield, but no label changes what it is. Even if you take away all the descriptions, the tree does not stop being itself. It simply is. The same is true of you. The core of who you are does not disappear when you retire, when you lose the job, when the relationship ends, when the applause stops. Those experiences shape you, but they do not define you. They are chapters, not the whole story. Consider how often people introduce themselves with titles. I'm a doctor. I'm a teacher. I'm a parent. I'm a founder. These labels are shortcuts that help others understand parts of us, but they are also traps. They make it easy to forget there is more to you than what you do. Ask yourself, if no one could see your resume, your accomplishments, your curated image, what would you rely on to know you are real? What would be left if every external source of validation disappeared? This is where many people panic. Because we have been conditioned to equate visibility with value, we are taught that identity must be broadcast to be believed, that our worth depends on other people's recognition. So we cling to titles as proof that we exist. But real identity is quieter. It does not need constant affirmation. It is the part of you that is unchanged by circumstance, the part that remains when your roles fall away. Think of the people who lose everything, a career, a marriage, a reputation, and still find something indestructible inside themselves. That is what endures when titles fade. That is what is real. When you stop believing that roles define you, you start to experience a deeper freedom. You no longer have to perform to feel worthy. You no longer have to fear the inevitable changes that strip away your status. You can meet each season of your life without panic because you know who you are is not at stake. This does not mean titles are meaningless. They can be powerful tools. They can open doors, create impact, and honor the work you have done. But they are only tools. They are not your essence. When you understand this, you can wear your roles lightly. You can enjoy them without worshiping them. You can let them go when their time is past without believing you are diminished. Think about how much of your energy has been spent defending an identity constructed of titles. How often you have felt like an imposter because you secretly feared the titles were the only reason you mattered. But you are not an imposter. You are a human being with inherent worth. Independent of the labels you wear, your existence does not require proof. Your dignity does not depend on applause. Ask yourself, what would it feel like to meet the world without introducing yourself by what you do? What would it feel like to rest in the knowledge that you are already enough without decoration? This is not an easy belief to unlearn, but when you do, you discover a clarity that no title can give you. The clarity that you have always been real, always been whole, always been worthy. The titles will come and go, they will rise and fall in importance, but you remain, and that is enough. The free will is absolute illusion. You wake up each day believing you are the master of your choices. You brush your teeth, pick out clothes, decide what to eat, and feel convinced that every decision emerges purely from your free will. It comforts you to believe you're steering your life consciously, that every step you take is guided entirely by your independent mind. But what if this belief in absolute freedom is itself an illusion, an intricate mirage your mind maintains to keep your sense of control intact? Imagine standing in a supermarket aisle, staring at shelves filled with hundreds of products. You think you're choosing freely when you pick your favorite snack. But pause and consider this deeply. Why is it your favorite? Why did you choose it? Perhaps you saw it advertised repeatedly as a child during Saturday morning cartoons. Perhaps the vibrant packaging triggers subconscious nostalgia, memories of comfort and security from a simpler time. What feels like a purely conscious choice is actually a subtle manipulation, shaped invisibly by years of marketing and carefully engineered chemical formulations designed to hook your brain's reward pathways. Every decision you make carries a hidden echo from your past. Picture yourself attracted to someone. Is this attraction truly spontaneous, or is your subconscious matching patterns from your childhood experiences, seeking familiar emotional dynamics you might not even realize you crave? Perhaps your early environment taught you love looks like intensity, conflict, or unpredictability. Now, without awareness, you repeatedly choose partners who replicate these patterns, feeling a magnetic pull that seems entirely natural. But in truth, your brain has been conditioned by history, responding to signals established long before you could even speak. Even your moral decisions, your sense of right and wrong, are not purely your own. They reflect the values and beliefs instilled by your parents, culture, religion, or society. Imagine someone raised in a family that valued strength above vulnerability. They will likely avoid choices that express weakness or emotional exposure, believing firmly they're deciding freely, never realizing how deeply their upbringing restricts their range of perceived options. And consider something as basic as food preference. You might passionately believe you love coffee purely for its taste. Yet, underneath, your brain chemistry is hooked on caffeine's subtle manipulation of neurotransmitters. The momentary rush of dopamine is mistaken for genuine desire. How free are you truly if chemicals silently whisper their demands into your choices each morning? Advertising relentlessly targets your subconscious. Picture scrolling mindlessly through social media. Each image, video, or headline plants subtle cues in your mind, reshaping your desires and fears without your consent. You believe you're immune, too intelligent, or skeptical to fall prey. But advertising doesn't persuade your rational mind. It bypasses it entirely, embedding messages directly into the subconscious. Later, at the store or online checkout, you mysteriously choose products, unaware of the invisible fingerprints left by marketing strategists who know your brain better than you do. Even survival instincts, ancient programming rooted deep within your biology, guide decisions you believe are consciously made. Your primitive brain, wired for protection and reproduction, pushes choices towards safety, comfort, status, and acceptance. Think about the social anxiety you feel entering a crowded room. You might choose to retreat, convincing yourself it's your own preference. But beneath that decision lies an instinctive drive, inherited from ancestors whose survival depended on group acceptance, warning you that rejection could mean isolation or death. Consider how powerful authority figures influence your beliefs without your awareness. Teachers, mentors, political leaders, celebrities, all shape your sense of self subtly but profoundly. You mimic their behaviors, internalize their values, believing you made these choices autonomously. Yet, your psyche remains quietly guided, following patterns established by those who shaped your worldview. Your choices feel free because your mind carefully obscures these hidden strings. Imagine trying to resist something like sugar. Logically, you know it's unhealthy. You consciously decide to avoid sweets, yet find yourself reaching for a candy bar when stressed. Is this truly a free decision, or an automatic response trained by years of habit and chemical reward? Your brain's internal narrative quickly rationalizes the indulgence, convincing you it was your choice all along. Neuroscience shows us unsettling evidence. Brain scans reveal your brain makes decisions seconds before your conscious mind realizes it. By the time you think you're actively choosing, the outcome has already been determined by subconscious processes. This discovery confronts you with an uncomfortable truth. The sensation of freely choosing may simply be your conscious mind's clever attempt at storytelling, creating the illusion of autonomy. Yet, understanding this doesn't strip you of agency. Rather, it offers a powerful new kind of freedom. The freedom to see your hidden motivations clearly. The freedom to understand how childhood wounds, chemical rewards, advertising, cultural expectations, and evolutionary instincts shape your desires. With awareness, you can begin making choices that align more closely with deeper truths rather than unconscious compulsions. Realizing your choices aren't entirely free doesn't mean surrendering control. It means reclaiming it from hidden forces. It means recognizing when you're repeating harmful patterns from your past, when marketing preys on your subconscious vulnerabilities, when primitive instincts limit your growth. Only then can you choose consciously, aware of the silent influences tugging at your decisions. Imagine a life where you move beyond simply reacting to old patterns. Imagine choosing partners who uplift rather than reinforce old pain. Imagine choosing career paths aligned with deeper purpose rather than societal approval. Imagine selecting food based on genuine nourishment rather than addictive chemicals. That is the true potential awaiting once you step outside the illusion of absolute free will and embrace the profound power of conscious awareness. Your life may not be as entirely free as you've believed, but you can reclaim it. By acknowledging the invisible strings of influence, you begin cutting them, one by one. Awareness gives you back the agency your subconscious lost in childhood, gives you back the autonomy stripped away by subtle advertising, gives you back the authentic choices diluted by chemical manipulation. You don't have to reject free will entirely, nor fall into despair about losing control. Instead, see clearly how each choice arises. Know yourself deeply enough to recognize when old patterns or external influences push your hand. Every moment of honest recognition expands your genuine freedom, inch by inch. Freedom isn't pretending you're immune to influence. It's acknowledging it openly, bravely, honestly. It's reclaiming the power to choose not blindly, but consciously, with eyes wide open. It is the courageous embrace of self-knowledge, empowering you to finally write your own story. Remember this clearly. Absolute free will may be an illusion, but conscious, intentional choice is very real. Your task now isn't to deny the strings that influence you, but to cut them gently, carefully, and deliberately, until the voice guiding you forward is finally and unmistakably your own.